Okay, I'm turning on the stream. It's on.
Did everyone receive the email? Is anyone not ready to begin?
Just a second, I have 10 minutes. Speech time. There we go. No, sorry.
Okay. Cool. Is anyone not ready to begin? Awesome. The call to restrict executive authority cannot be understood as a neutral shift within legal power structure, so it must be situated in its anti-Asian context. Executive Order 9066 and its call for Japanese determinant demonstrates the historical capacity of the executive to exceed its authority despite legal protections granted through citizenship. Internment is a forgotten hardly topic because the co-constituent nature in which branches of government operate means that the placing of Asian people in a state of exception cannot be understood as an instance of legal failure, but the core relationship between Asians and the law that Saito and on February 1994, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 giving most matters authority to exclude any and all persons of any military issues and orders. Each by attention pursuant to Executive Order 966 excluded from the West Coast all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien, non-alien government justifications that there was insufficient time to service to the law from this world determined Japanese reconciled the ideas by which the government person of the one Japanese actually fled and then the Moscow to camp was simply infeasible to distinguish the chief from the ghost because the Japanese race is enemy race. Supreme Courts were welcome to confront such explicit race-based measures can be seen in just facts. Majority of Korematsu was not excluded from the military because of the hostility to him as race. He was excluded because we are war with the Japanese Empire. Determined was the free kind measure to take without probable cause except the National Origin Committee quite illegal with such suspicion. National Origin name of proxy for criminal predisposition. We cannot limit ourselves to resisting each new iteration of this pattern in a peaceful fashion, appealing to Congress, the executive, or even the courts to curb particular excesses or to enforce specific constitutional guarantees in a more effective manner. Still leaves Justice Jackson's loaded weapon available to those who utilize it in the future. This may be the most dangerous legacy of the Japanese American determined the failure of all branches of government to acknowledge what actually happened to take effective remedial measures or to be held accountable. Those responsible acknowledge justice. The Supreme Court did a remarkable job forging false deniability for others. Those who at the time of determined saw for the justice and outrage said it wasn't true, so the Senate continued to be silent and are held even during the presence of acknowledging their presence. Discussions of internment is necessary to articulate that the way the Asian American political subjectivity is uniquely produced through governance. Internment is the political frame for the development of new jurisdictional and social technologies that sought to produce the ideal Asian citizen subject. Notions of loyalty and patriotism being a prerequisite of legal productions offered a citizenship necessitate Japanese Americans to perform a patriotic national identity in camps that would prove their loyalty to the integrity of the nation and the Constitution. This process structures Asian legal identities where at any moment the rights can be sacrificed in the name of national emergency. That's Chambers Lesson 13. The jurisdictional political technology that occurs sneaking to form matrix during the incarceration process. Of course, that analysis for Asian American studies, the outcomes of this violent history of Asian American racialization by the state of history that is not often denied, or at least eluded by pervasive national amnesia. Common gestures of the Japanese American concentration camps is the state of exceptions. Centralized modern governments theorizing the concentration camps is a biopolitical paradigm of the modern day. Camps produce Japanese American subjects is willing to accept and perform the simultaneous need of citizenship and the suspension of its intended protections by investigating new methods that encourage Japanese Americans to display exhibit paradox to legitimate their subjection to daily performance of the patriotic national identification. Every act of self-preservation of aesthetic political dimensions that become quite theatrical in the Constitution. Exhibition of political disruption, racial subjectivity, incarceration process, mobilizing formativity of the law to reshape Japanese American civic subjectivity. EO 9066 was bolstered by 2 centuries of preceding legislation, which included the Naturalization Act of 1790, the Ozawa versus United States, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907. The citizenship was disarticulated from U.S. reference to Japanese descendant transformed into non-aliens. The government sought to narrate and represent the evacuations voluntary. The courts played a significant role by simply suggesting that a small minority of Japanese Americans by being disloyal. The vast majority of DK would not compelled to prove that they were not the minority of patriotic nationally could dispel charges of disloyalty while giving the forced relocation and concentration camps local legitimate voluntary evacuation. This paradoxical to result in the dominant narratives of the incarceration that describe Japanese Americans of the war era as the quiet Americans depicting as volunteering for and accepting the justice as a means of demonstrating their loyalty to the U.S. nation's jackals ideal citizens would put faith in the integrity of the nation and the Constitution while marginalizing efforts to criticize and oppose the obvious. The government's advanced jackal collaborated with the government to quell resistance among the Nikkei. The Manzanar camp director Mara now better trained, more stable, more deeply conscious of the rights of citizenship than they would have been if evacuation not take place. The Japanese American subject again perform a mode of controlled citizenship, proudly demonstrating the claim to U.S. citizenship in the very place that exemplifies this negation. The framing of Japanese Americans as enemy alien is rooted in yellow paralotics that position Asian Americans as foreigners within expected to justify their inclusion into the nation state by assimilating and upholding democratic ideals of liberal inclusionism. Those who assimilate successfully are constituted into the myth of the modern minority, replicating the flip side of yellow parallel. Asian Americans are represented as having overcome racial discrimination through their own hard work and dedication that justifies anti-Asian discrimination in a new form. Democracy is sustained by these contradictions. The willing assimilation of Asian Americans upholds democratic legitimacy and crushes collective attempts at resistance. As Chang in 13, the Soviet Union disseminated stories of mystery of nation of blacks in the United States, hammer the nation's ability to build trusting committee to establish reports of civil rights form to advance the nation's policy of communities containment and maintain that racialized minority integration was critical to reclaiming the legitimacy of American democracy, delineate a place for democracy, and national security interactive became mutually against of both Asian American racial formation gave rise to fact casts, the lowest sentences to be integrated dominant societies, aliens first to be deported. These state generous stories were important for influencing the efforts by Asian Americans to secure their social political legitimacy in the federal government. True successful incorporating Asian Americans brings to forth the American way of life, show the nation to the world, and also employment and policies and modern activities, scrutinize loyalty to Chinese Korean Americans, promote superiority of the American political system by expressing consent to views of communist revolution, China along with Korean War, advanced beliefs about the likelihood that Chinese Korean Americans were communist agents who needed to be ousted to by assimilation function to reveal the goals and aspirations of the state gender narrative to successful adjustment of Asian Americans to U.S. side to establish the superiority of the American political system. The policy act to mitigate wartime concerns of the national security resulted in German and the Chinese Exclusion Act 1943. Max Act was passed with great status of Chinese Act, demonstrating how the racial formation of Asian Americans is forced to then continue to make social setting made Chinese Americans contingent on U.S. foreign relations to Asia, albeit in a contrary fashion than what executive order 966 said exactly on the Japanese Sea. Max Act was acted toward the efforts of the Japanese government to unite Asia under its leadership. Its passage, moreover, showed the credibility of the U.S. democracy and the nation's treatment of Chinese races became consequential facts of security and alliance with China. The American democracy was a form of government that made the achievement of social justice possible. The racial formation of Asian as a player of foreigners within thus allowed the government to run the successes of a very select group of Asian Americans to represent the right status of all Asian Americans, so shifting U.S. foreign relations with Asia, and instead the federal government to use the Chinese Americans as friends distinguished from the enemies. The Japanese Asian Americans racial formation companies prosecuting assimilation to be the ideological contract that say drew upon negotiating Asian Americans as derivative of the integration, developing narrative progress. Asian American culture can work to reimagine popular understandings of American democracy and social progress. Asian Americans as forces within thus revealed the narrative strategies that the state developed to conceive the national identity of democracy and whiteness, but still inclusive. This inescapable double bind of representing the American dream while simultaneously being marked as perpetual outsiders sets the Asian identity on a never-ending quest for democratic inclusionism that resulted in a shattering of the psyche, producing self-hate and internalized policing that's given 14. Shame revolts that people apprehension of the self-esteem diminish a little less, and this can result from noting one has failed to live up to certain ideals without oneself failing. One feels kind of associational shame through strong identification with another person, or group that the Asian people have failed might be a result of coming to a world in which one has failed to diminish the goal of self is not consideration of flawed agency, but a flawed being. Abramson's message is not simply float around. They're politically organized anti-Asian messages drawing from American Orientalism. In this case, of this sort of shame is not the result of fate agency, but the inward resonance of expressive social order. Self-containment has a different dynamic. One feels negative affect at somebody's perceived inferior nature or qualities. One's feeling is phenomenologically hierarchical, where the agent seeks the attachment from the worthy target. The primary role content would be seen to the preservation of social hierarchy. Self-content characterized by negative affect felt towards one's own perceived inferior nature, only the sense of attachment from one's own self. Self-content indicate there were inward resonances of expressing social order rather than accountability for validity. In shame, one realizes, concedes, or actively, otherwise passively accepts painful self-contagion emotion. By contrast, in self-content, one judges, or otherwise actively asserts its raging conception of the self upon the self. Self-content such involves judging or condemning. One looks down upon one's own shameable self and is distinctly attached from one's own self. The condemning self disaffiliates from the main self. Since in actuality, the condemned self is the main self. The condemned self is fabricated from the materials of the other's identity, specific or general, active or discordant, framed by a process of imaginative identification. Given this relationship between law and subjectivity was reforming understanding resistance, especially in debate. Jeff and I affirm post-memory is a refusal to forget the injustice of determined in the context of executive powers. We should not be looking to abstractly pretend to change political authority in a structure that will never listen to foreign bodies, says Day and 16. This book's attention focus draws on corresponding racial policy, making the key turning points since the 19th century. China's railroad, labor in the 1880s, and subsequent immigration restriction was the expansion of anti-Asian immigration restrictions in the 1920s, relocation and internment of Japanese Americans ability during after World War II in the late 1960s, new organization of immigration policy rather than the traditional approach to history as a linear and unified development of genealogy and unstable sandwich of both features and heterogeneous layers that threaten the factual inheritor from within or from underneath. That out of forth of post-memory in order to call attention to the affect racial genealogy. Post-memory is very particular that's a connection to object or source immediate, not through recollection, but through an imaginative investment and creation. Post-memory characterizes the experience of those who grew up dominated by narratives that precede their birth, whose overlaid stories evacuated by the stories of previous generations, shaped by traumatic events, but neither understood nor recreated. The notion of proposed memory to indicate a form of future by memory that's to come to capture the simultaneous utopia and future explored in Asian North American reconfigurations of history.
我们不会让你们忘记我们。我觉得我经常在想这些事情，所以你们也得想一想。Sturgeon and one. The remembering of internment camps come primarily through a generation that grew up outside the camps with the conviction of the rights to redress their memory. I began searching for a history, my own history. I remember having this feeling that I was haunted by something, that I was living in a family full of ghosts. I had never been there yet. I had a memory of it. I could remember a time of great status before I was born. We had been moved. I had no idea where these memories came from, yet I knew the place. It is already her memory, demanding representation. This is an image that disrupts the concept of memories dying, embodied memory. Memory that is passed through generation, that is always already within. Culture memory is always being rescripted. Re-narrativization is essential to memory. What is the appropriate memory here? Can a moral properly memorialize the event? The most powerful concept of morals demand forms of reenactment in the sense that they force viewers to participate rather than to find a comfortable distance. What then is interment demand as memory representation? What challenges posed to the complicity of memory and forgetting? To begin to memorialize, we need to open up the question of what constitutes American nationalism and identity, to rethink the myth of America's actions in World War II, the internment of American citizens because of their racist event that is also a compelling narrative of the United States as the triumphant country. The narrative of a moral nation forms a central image of American nationalism, the process by which individuals are transformed into subjects of a collectively held history. Memory of the camps will require refiguring the definition of the national meaning of America, to consider the weight of this myth of American morality and subsequent historical events of what constitutes Americans. When attorneys left the camps, they were often provided with instructions on how to integrate back into America, ways to successfully relocate. These guys read like instructions conditions for status as model minorities. Don't stand out. Don't congregate with other Japanese people in public. Speak English. Be reliable and hardworking. Remember the fate of others is in your hand. Internment succeeded at further Americanizing the Japanese Americans. They lost familiar power over their offspring, and tightly knit communities were broken apart and dispersed. New communities were formed as internees from different leagues were placed together. The camps ultimately worked to assemble them. Perhaps it is only about understanding what kind of Americans Japanese Americans constitute rather than traumatized, so we can begin to trump the image of America produced by the war.
What part of the topic is internment the forgotten heart of?
The entire topic. The rejection and the call for a respectable reduction of executive authority assumes
So
that
it's-
sort of the notion of separation of powers is fundamentally a check on executive
Okay.
overreach. Our argument is that the three branches of government are mutually constitutive, work together. The Supreme Court in the
Okay.
case of internment
What
forged plausible
Is the
deniability for the
role
executive.
of debate in the 1AC?
We think internment as a civilizing process is not separate from debate, but rather structures what engagement in debate looks like for Asian debaters. So the call for to have fidelity to the Constitution and put faith in separation of powers to check and abuse the
Okay,
executive.
what is the role of debate? Like, why should you read the 1AC and then we give a 1AC? Why should that happen?
We have introduced a strategy of post-memory to resist and challenge the dominant narrative of the U.S. benign imperialism that had resurrected post-World War II. You can negate post-memory and say post-memory is a bad strategy. You can have a bunch of different reasons why post-memory is bad and
I get
reasons why
that
we
there
should
are
focus
like
on psychological
arguments that we
violence,
can
etc.
read. That's
Yeah.
not getting to the heart of my question. The heart of my question is why is it important for us to say any of the things you just said we could say?
It's important so we can learn about how power functions. It's important so we can test strategies and implement them in different ways. Obviously, it's a question of like what strategy specifically read. We think some strategies are more pedagogically valuable, but the T argument you're going to read is not.
Okay, fair enough. The Sturkin card at the bottom of the one you see, the one that's about post-memory, talks about how people experience those memories. I have two subpoints. A, how are judges supposed to verify or know if the process of post-memory is actually reworking intergenerational knowledge?
So like how do the judges know that trauma is passed down intergenerationally? I would say use Jeff as, like, believe Jeff.
Okay, and why, the second subpoint, why is it good for these three older white judges to make that determination about the validity of this as Jeff's strategy?
Which is our whole argument.
That's fair. Okay, I want to go back to this some strategies are more effective than others as a way of contesting the 1AC thing. What are the characteristics of strategies that are versus are not effective at testing the 1AC or good for testing the 1AC?
Strategies that obviously have used some sort of thought and preparation, unlike like you are going to be here to be prepared to be unprepared. Our argument is that you should be able to research the strategy.
How do
and
you know
read
if
counter-strategy.
a strategy that we read represents preparation? Like, it definitely represented the preparation of like being put in a speech doc. Like, what's enough preparation?
Obviously, there's no bright line between sufficient and insufficient preparation, but it's a sliding scale, right? Like, you're going to come here and read your same T blocks, but other debates, such as USC, KW that we had last night, had specific link arguments as to Derridarian forms of post-memory.
Okay.
That was a great debate, pedagogically. They read for revolutionary Marxism, and we said post-memory outweighs.
You literally, you stood up and you were like, the structure of the resolution is bad. How is saying defending the resolution is possible not an explicit impact turn to that claim that is a well-prepared strategy?
Like, how is
Is
saying...
framework a strategy you could go for? Yes, obviously.
Too long.
It's like
In
framework is
case.
yes. Impact turn to yes.
All I heard was in case. What was
Too off.
do you want me to leave this here? You're going to something there.
I'll speak.
Let me leave it.
That's fine, thanks.
Yeah, everyone.
Have you sent it yet? Yep.
I said, don't have to be down there, man. I'm just a fan.
Anyone not ready?
I'm not ready.
Excuse me one moment, sorry. We have a lot of clutter on our desk. Just want to clear out. Do you need to?
Hey, Lena, you accidentally sent round 6.
Okay, sorry about that.
I was thinking about the Sadia Hartman link, but
Yeah, but
like interesting debate.
Alright, the right one should be sent.
Oh, I'm going to send another one out.
Yeah, I accidentally sent the wrong doc.
Oh, maybe this is good then.
The one says round 6.
Dennis? Round 6.
You said 2 in case, right?
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
I'm gonna one more pen. No, 'cause you
Alright, is anyone not good? First off, topicality, USFG should means the debate is solely about a policy established by government means action 3. Each topic contains to do with the action, the should adopt an action, the verb should urge an action, should means to put a policy into action, the government means the entire debate is about whether something ought to occur. Statutory restrictions are binding law enacted by Congress. Hill 13, statute law enacted by Congress, regulations and exos proclamations are not statutes for judicial as courts distinct from other actions. Webster's 1 relating to judiciary can be administrative, executive, legislative, created by a court. Violation, the AF skirts the resolution question and doesn't defend a policy to restrict executive power. Vote negative for predictable limits. Pre-tournament private structure on the topic is a point of offense. Radical AF choice shifts the basis for the debate and unbalances ground towards the AF. They have incentives to cement their infinite prep by selecting the most one-sided ideas and can choose only orientations toward the world, not praxis with an act or a mechanism. A well-defined resolution is critical to allow the neg to refute the AF in an in-depth fashion. This process of negation produces iterative testing and improvement where we learn to improve our arguments based on our opponent's arguments. This process does not prescribe particular styles or forms of argument, but does require a common point of disagreement around which arguments can be organized. That's posture. In 16, only if reasoning exposed contrary arguments can be tested. Merits must go through labor negative group polarization be countered by disagreement, opposing position, apart from looking negative face and hearing with an entering exchange of arguments can test and improve our position. We might not know what we believe until we develop a line of argument against our beliefs and discuss the issue with someone who opposes our view might be the most helpful way of corroborating our adversaries' motivated to find the rationale to outline the discovery. A single right answer to the objection could not be achieved by a non-argumentative procedure. A vote would not help explore commonalities or scrutinize positions, but here argumentative procedures are not geared toward a decision or the essential structure of their debates about the winning or losing helps keep participants engaged. If judges are with flip a coin, there would be little incentive to exchange arguments. Fulcrum line and overlapping common ground materials accepted in practice. Two athletes are ready to the same contact where they follow the same rules but different styles, or if they even if they're single, no best style, they are to the same process. It's left for disagreement, so without abandoning the talking about the same context, such a semantic collapse is only when lacks sufficient overlap. They can't get to offense. We don't have the power to impose a norm, only persuade you that their argumentative practices should be rejected. Every debate requires a winner and a loser by nature, so voting neg doesn't reject them from debate, just as the state should make a better argument. Anderson 6, arguments stand whether their persuasion of argument is favor of an argument is not the case that argument in favor of debate is handed by to a press power, and I imagine your argument is progressive, but what you argue for would be if enforced it. My book doesn't imagine what is enforceable. A single argument in favor of procedural term, the elevation of state is symptom of the tendency to give radios, meaning every object argument gets tested, the equivalent of war. There is a distinction between neg and identification move that solves by argument, and insists in some single manner of argument. The form I've committed to the latter or not. We make decisions all the time about what rights to coaches with an academic and in exchange never say implicit or of argument, a tendency to judge whether a person is making a stronger or weak case that time is taken judging all manner of performance. However, course or find a renewed commitment to the value of more scholarship, clearly agreed upon protocols of pure scholarship benefit from explicit affirmation. Next off is frame subtraction. The 1EC affirms post-memory is a refusal to forget the injustices of internment. That word is a euphemism that places a gentle face on the violence of mass incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, which corrupts their historical retrieval and subtly rhetorically shapes their politics into the view of the oppressor, which makes future violations more likely. Ishizuka 16, language matters, but the word determines a euphemism of mass incarceration, not be used. The calling full-scale abrogation by rights is a kind of general term that diminishes the magnitude of injustice. Roosevelt called themselves concentric concentration camps. Let's for the past have gone unheeded. The question is not learning histories. It begs the question of what becomes such a read and from whose point of view. Freezing accounts of assault, forced operation, and demonization in prison may not be conveyed by calling them a dark chapter. The learning critical language requires thinking about how the violation of language shapes their world. Internment is euphemism for mass incarceration to be retired. Not only is accurate, but diminishes magnitude of the term. Internment rather than justice as unpalatable. Using the analytic lens of internment repeats the distorted and manipulated version of history written by entities who are the most invested in racism. Voting neg is an act of rewriting that is essential to accurate and effective scholarship. scholarly practice. Moi 13. The history turned by dictators were here forever burdened with historical accounts written in new missing vocabulary. Time to write misleading language and focus on truth. The objective is vocabulary facilitates more accurate understanding of government activity during the war. It was implemented by euphemistic terms to make actions acceptable to the vocabulary that adequately describe what happened in euphemistic terms they seem but not acceptable history. Japanese Americans tend to hold failure euphemisms strategic misrepresentation. We need to use to control the public perception about force to remove low Japanese American citizens after Vietnam. The civil rights movement in the CIA is compelling to have the record reflect reality. Scholars should be guided by appropriate descriptors words of elicited accuracy. Analysis will be understood by using the recommended word and term in the has legal definition. The most incarcerated were citizens in turn. Thus, the term does not apply incarceration to more accurately describe those who held in camps. This reflects person-like conditions as well as the view that they were guilty. We can defend the rest of the act strategy and negate only certain parts, including 2AC frames. 2 in our consolidation is best. Only conditional tests of limited ingredient incentivize narrow testing of their specific claims, requiring us to disprove the entire act force's extreme impact terms that lack nuance and political utility. Nuance testing is a better model of engagement to improve practice. Williams 15. The many have no working on limits. You never critique people from your side, especially if you're speaking if there's no oppression, but an effective movement can't attack criticisms with the hopes with whom you largely agree, never criticizing otherwise. Left roots and say this is real, but you were not helpful making that accusation down alienates allies from to backlash against social injustice and prevents act or encouraging critique. We found no point where any critique attacks to be deemed depression and activism may pose no transfer, but they cannot take comfort in their cocoon. In the case. Neurological racial bias is flexible and determined by coalitional habit forming, orienting groups around institutional change. Best breaks down bias. This is often because their theory rejects these solutions. Sakara 15. It would be easy to see powerful evidence of racism permanent. However, race research and other people cannot raise themselves as fundamental research and coalition between Trump, preferences Trump race and research team can admit automatic bias to be part of groups to produce an effect on brain activity in the middle of to the other team rather than the race studies that dictate change to get over race stereotypes are being tempered with a flexible nature often regions to be optimistic. One strategy to be grouped together around a common goal of creating cohesion can reduce apathy, this reduce direction and creating opportunities for dialogue, addressing injustice. So collective action and institutional evolution can address systematic racism. The science is clear through bias and discrimination and interchangeable precedents are not inevitable and the consequences of biology. Post-memory fails and evacuates ethics. Uwali 15. Even Hirsch acknowledges the problem use post-memory is post-memory directly overdetermined. Hirsch replaces the memories of first-gen by claiming post-gen can identify answers to post-memory bestows too much authority because post-gen has not lived through the experiences. This belittles experience without hollowing out subjectivity and placing within previous trauma. Post-memorial work sabotage ethical reflection inherent to remembering and cope with trauma. One size fits all approach to diminish healing effects of remembrance. The 1EC's value stands on its own, responding to it with judgment, and the ballot is a hollow validation that siphons off political energy and draws them into the oppressive grades of the academy. Vote neg to decline affirmation. Full said 9090. Conservatives had run the role of the credit presenting communities as the object of investigation. The criticism is not agent active discourse because internal their suggestion that law communities need the academic critic contradicts the interruption to nature. Fails to offer adequate argument for speaking out of the streets and studying in the classroom, treating it as less process and as an object of analysis within the academy without addressing whether the critic should be examining in the first place. We are to leave members are prepared to be run into surveillance for after presentation will so legitimacy nothing nonetheless the effects destruction siphon energy and the academic practice we enjoy. We destroy catharsis for recognition take place in material opportunities, but with legitimation make any changes and conditions. The critic is focusing on hidden text and rendering comprehensible, turning covert discourses to object analysis for subjecting them to the gaze of dominant and powerful relation. The academy rejects their formalist under reading of internment. Korematsu is reviled law irrelevant to modern practice and functionally overturned by heightened scrutiny laws and the deference doctrine, but gains are a product of legally nuanced strategies they reject. No prerequisite moral appeals are insufficient, so it's offense. Feldman 16. Korematsu has never been overturned. That means good laws, no moral plea, not treating laws enough. Fortunately, there's legal argument. It doesn't to be wrong at the moment. It was decided that not follow the Kennedy adopted the theory of the Lawrence court's deference to the activity to overcome equal doctrine would not be applicable under current doctrine. The court would have to give action on the highest scrutiny. Korematsu was already overruled by sub-rosa that cases there was scrutiny or with the formalist view may be tempered by the realist idea. Law may be defined as a prediction of what courts will do. Court is extremely Korematsu has been widely disparaged. Congress repudiated directly in CLA and NDT discredited. It was consensus Korematsu had entered anti-canon even arch conservatives to justices would think long and hard before going against this. Is not precedent. Now the role of legal scholars is to develop strategies for confronting legal justices faced by the Asian Americans, and that sacrificing it for theory without practice turns case and doesn't solve. That's all. Their Sato evidence. Insert the blue highlighting its a conclusion. Now that law is imperfect, but it still has many important productive uses. Their claims of a state of exception oversimplify. Sherman 17 critically encourage sloppy dismissals of important scholarship any attempt to overcome this needs to do so not simply by abstractly negating but productively or superseding preoccupation with dangerous legalism impedes the pursuit of theories properly challenging your anti-legalism critics precisely offering complex assessment of laws achieving they are sure protection functions along with normative virtues. If we just once we evolve for oversight worries they were committing political mistakes we really believe access legally and the other way for us to change for access detainees want to have no over those anger rights surveillance or women subject to patriarchal power need for legal protections release of their words about legalism first created plan for legal law. They have a conversation about possible pathologies. Rejecting legal engagement unleashes the worst forms of violence. Barn attend the critical parents and an idealist view of the alternative critical from things taking for granted the vacuum created leads to solid errors being reconstructed in the wake of this rollback, everything, corrupt, cartels, necro, trafficking culture, proliferate, alternative forms of avoided states, fourth, they're dismantled and run by slippage and dust into these theories, cover up and explanatory question, explanatory question remains unclear whether either can provide adequate resources for practical harms and not help by denigration, liberalism, the catch-all, and discrimination, legal engagement's good, the alt is bad, and risks violent, fill-in, McCluskey, AT, failure to report evidence of weak left policy, as much as legalism, anti-legalism may review forced capitulation, left capitulation, that scholars will advance right policy, so they attribute liberal inadequacies to legalism in general, rather than the particular rules of political interest or not. Faced with dynamically shaped by a variety of factors, advocacy effectively changes starts where their strength is vision, critical right that law's power cannot be tamed by formal rules, where they're saying true found legal power, showing legalism, illusory, voucher purity, activism should engage rather than see law. They ignore the same facts and challenge and abstention from governance. Mark the card of governance.
You good for cross?
Yep.
Does the 1NC endorse Jeff's interjection in Chinese at the bottom of the 1AC with regards to frame subtraction?
Yes.
Why should you get a ballot for affirming Jeff's performance and benefiting from the labor he took to write the F and perform?
Ezra, you want to explain that?
I disagree with that interpretation of how our frame subtraction argument operates. It's a framing strategy to understand that there are flaws in some moments of the 1AC. It's impossible to some extent for us to ever negate that portion of the affirmative, which is a reason why critiquing other relevant parts of the affirmative and then us saying we don't disagree with this, we should
Ezra, what constitutes a relevant part of the affirmative? Like, you've indicated that sort of constraints are key to meaningful difference, but how do you prevent white people from just policing Asian people's language and passing it off as a meaningful disagreement?
I mean, the Williams evidence talks about the fact that if we can win a substantive impact to our link argument, i.e. if we can win a reason why the exclusion that we're
our argument is that these are relevant parts of the affirmative that
we
we
asked you to critique the language that I use.
You literally asked us to test the 1AC and spent 3 minutes explaining that.
So this is an example of what your model of competition testing would look like?
No, this is what we did in response to the 1AC. It's not necessarily something that
so it's not a
framework
model, it's just an external argument for engaging with the app.
Yeah,
it's not like a net benefit for me.
What is the topical version of the app?
I'm not 100% sure how to answer that right now, but, that'll be in the block, I guess.
Sure. What constitutes an effective test of the affirmative, as per posture?
So our argument is that in order to create the conditions for an effective test, the negative needs to be able to somewhat predict what the affirmative will be so that they can prepare a strategy that, comprehends.
So posture says a predictable basis for disagreement is key to getting the benefits of iterative testing. So it's about predictability.
Yes.
Cool. What is the first piece of evidence in the case? The Sikara evidence about people being on different teams means that racial bias is valuable. Have you ever seen Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen?
Where are we going with this?
Have you ever seen Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen?
No.
Okay. Well, on the team in the show, the teams are divided, segregated by gender, men and women. But within teams, all the minorities and people of color are eliminated first by each team. How can Sikara explain that?
Well, okay, so probably, the production of that show is probably racist. I don't know. They control who goes home. I don't know how to say explain that. It's not about that has nothing to do with the people on the team eliminating them. I don't see. That seems very different than what this card is talking about.
So the question, but Jeff's question is that how do you resolve bias within team structures?
Okay, we're huge Big Brother fans, so let's give an example. On Big Brother, they regularly have black contestants, and they often get eliminated because they are forced to cast themselves in certain positions as the product of power that operates over them in order to state themselves as representations that can't have strategic gains.
We should have done this, not invaded this. It'll start forever. I'm not going to talk about that right now.
Can we put it in the context of Gilligan's Island?
Yep.
929. Let me just send these cards. It'll be case T and then bridge. Yep, just sent it. Sounds good.
And I'm sorry, one more time.
Case, T, and then frame
Okay.
subtraction. Everyone ready? Cool. Korematsu is a necessary starting point for theorizing the way that executive authority can be exercised despite legal restrictions. Our first piece of Saito evidence describes that the Japanese internment was legally justified in spite of legal protections like citizenship rendered void and relegated to the JAP. The attempt to begin resolution of discussions at the governmental level fails to understand how those discussions implicate our subjectivities. We have two impact arguments. Subpoint A is precarity or chain evidence describes democratic liberalism as a reference point through which Asian Americans articulate their own political subjectivity, which seeks to justify internment as a necessary precaution to preserve democracy. The 1C forefronts internment as a state of exception that reveals the precarity of political agency for Asian Americans' participation in spaces like debate become fruitless investments where access to fiat scenarios can be revoked at any time through reproduction of Asian as yellow peril, as per their frame subtraction arguments. The second impact is psychological violence. Our Chambers lets in evidence identifies the way that internment produces this goal of an ideal Asian citizen subject to demands performances of a patriotic national identity to prove one's loyalty to the state. This demand for loyalty forces the tearing within Asian identity. Asians have to constantly struggle to fit towards the ideal political subject through assimilation with striving towards a better self that is ultimately unachievable. Our evidence describes whether this event becomes internalized as self-hatred and psychological violence. The 1C firms of post-memory as a refusal to forget the role of internment and executive authority in its formation of Asian American political subjectivity. Centering Korematsu and discussing of the resolution recognizes how internment saturates and overdetermines all forms of political engagement and its performance. The 1AC refuses the demand for planned focus through the presentation of my affective racial genealogy, which calls upon a space for a collective consciousness of Asian Americans. The injunction of me to the 1AC replicates to this normative disruption of normative typos within policy debate, which allows me to use debate as a space to critique democracy and its relation to progress measures. This car heavens doesn't make any sense. It begs the question of A, if they can change racial bias, what implication does that have for the processes of internment and governance that necessarily were relegated, and obviously where Asian people were obviously relegated as external idea. The logic of a Jap proves that even if they can change that logic, it's only geared towards the logic of assimilation, which is why governance is a necessary thing to explain it. The Wiley evidence about post-memory, this argument is exactly a link argument because you theorize internment as an event, not a structure of civil society. The effects of it obviously still implicate Asian political subjectivity, and they concede the cross argument that you should just trust me because the theorization of all of our arguments are predicated off that relationship to embodiment in the first place. The Phillips evidence is not unique because our whole argument is about understanding how we can engage with debate, given that it's a hollow institution. Our arguments articulating things like governance means that we can make debate meaningful to produce skills for things like Asian subject or people of color excited to engage with the process of debate in order to make it meaningful external to just planned debate, which is a necessary prerequisite to all the framework arguments. The Feldman evidence one is obviously Korematsu is so relevant because the overturning it to justify the Muslim ban on the same day proves a narrative of democratic liberalism that there's also the capacity to say that that was horrible, but simultaneously perform the same thing. And the second argument is that their argument tries to forget it and view it as non-relevant. First, the Saito evidence I'm not going to answer because I didn't read it and just didn't insert it, which is a ridiculous blind reading evidence that Schumer made evidence about the law. It assumes that the law is something external, that the law necessarily in the abstract can be good. Our argument is all about the way that the affirmative is engaging with that law in the first place, with that subjectivities are produced in that process. The last two arguments are rejecting legal engagement. They don't have there's no uniqueness argument for why engagement is necessary now, but the framing of engagement as in crisis replicates the logic of the state of exception that makes and justifies executive authority to make it even stronger because the politics is seen as needing someone to come over and take charge of it all in the first place, which obviously makes executive authority stronger. The topicality debate foreigners within this have framework position taking debaters with foreigners within, where we always have to make a side to prove that we are your ideal subject or be marked as anti-subversive reported. This demonstrates the historical amnesia surrounding interpretation that necessitates that Asians suppress their psychological violence in order to participate. You should lose this debate. The rhetoric of we make debate more fair or benefits only granted to white debaters. Asians will always be vulnerable in your model, subject to precarity. It's a precondition for you to fuck around and talk about things like the ESR kind of club. The 1AC line reminds us to always put others first, that the faith of others is in your hands. Is how I never get to put myself first. So your model asks you to look past me to affirm some greater good of the game, which is exactly how internment becomes naturalized. You shouldn't vote on things like potential, which also you should vote on things like potential abuse. The counter-interpretation you can either affirm or negate the resolution. It's also the grounds on the argument that the thesis of suicide debate is correct. They can just either affirmative on the negative. It gives them more of a prevalent style, less as class in 12. There comes best every now and then a resolution so agrees to that free from defender rather than from being obligated to defend the resolution from the resolution being incorrect in a way does not require the negative team to defend the resolution. Key aspect is competition can do more than alternative reasons why the resolution fault has to be for when irrational be incorrect in negative the resolution has a negative function. Although the affirmative rather affirmative damage to the resolution followed by argument saying that this is advantage should be top action negative the resolution is also sealed for the affirmative rather than the solid defense and choosing resolution sets that rather than negative would free the affirmative from defending resolution they fundamentally disagree increase options available to the affirmative to increase the education negative pushes the fundamental purpose of the education like focus under the policy concerns about particular resolution or philosophical critical issues suggest by the resolution that team might only require a affirmative position even that decision is a rejection of the resolution negative to agree the a couple of net benefits. First, the state of exception just had restrictions on executive power purely through legislation are ineffective. For proves that actual legal power means that all three branches of the government can still work together under the guise of checks and balances while still justifying things like internment, things like the Muslim ban prove our narrative arguments about the narrative of liberalism. And also means that any topical version of the government to check itself only justifies further naturalization of internment. The second impact is cruel optimism. Their model requires fiat, which presumes access to levels of power which centers the subject with further naturalized relations to the law, which means that they can't theorize the way that foreigners makes political relations impossible for Asian people after dissecting the self, which produces psychological violence. The impact is burnout because Asians are never given a roadmap for how to use the skills that we produce under your model, so we just invest in fake fiat rules only to leave debate and feel powers. The third impact is KPK debate. Your model holding is so a small net benefit means that you should vote for the teal, so if the model is at best a demand for recognition from the state, understanding the state is the only possible vehicle for resistance context to the political imaginary makes it possible for us to realize our own subjective capacities in relation to debate. The governance is that the framing of legal engagement as a model means that those who refuse engagement become scripted as yellow pearl, and those who accept become model minorities. Debate replicates the logics of internment to produce Asians, quote, now better trained, more stable, more deeply conscious of the rights and obligations as citizens. After the one I see internment becomes naturalized in debate, so here's a community groups like the Japanese American Citizens League, which is what all of their evidence is, all of the evidence is in the context of from the frames of structure are become saturated by forms of state governance and internalized forms of intercommunal policing and assimilation that seek to help produce better model minorities while pathologizing less engaged Asians as yellow pearl, making community building impossible. And also proves that performance is a massive dissatisfaction with the research paradigm. Their argument about topic education is outweighed because we're winning the way those methodologies are performed in spaces like debate implicates that content. If we win this dissent, even if they win the content of their model is useful for some white people, then you should vote for it anyway. Only we can explain how that education gets mobilized and the implication it has for people of color too. And actually in the first place, the argument about topic being the point of the counter-interpretation obviously also off that and obviously also posture argument could we still sustain the field of competition, but we think that we can use competition as a way to produce better strategy in the first place. It's also an impact to their argument about the ballot still making the block because the ballot artificially inserts Korematsu into the research paradigm, which proves that competitive incentives can still obviously for a particular state to education, which is the net benefits voting in front of the Anderson evidence assumes that arguments can exist neutrally and that you should stop complaining about your race because you're just making bad arguments. Our argument is that debate and its engagement necessitates a particular type of performance for Asian people in the first place, which proves that the body will always implicate the arguments that you make in the first place. Governance is obviously a massive impact to the thesis of this argument because all arguments that what you perform and what you say obviously implicates and produces your subjectivity. Fairness impact is dead as the most arbitrary and abstract impact to prove the similarity to rhetoric centering Americans during internment. The distinction between what is fair and is governed by performance. Japanese people got interned for not being quote American enough, which doesn't signify anything until it manifests through demands for performance. Playing baseball, saying the pledge, reading plans, because that's when internment solidifies the civic, which is the same way that fair comes to relate to plan debate. Fair comes to signify four white people arguing against each other in front of a white judge, which is kind of what this debate looks like almost. Which then gets externalized and placed onto Asian as expectations that we could have never met in the first place. We were seen as ones ruining the game, which proves that KPK debate is necessary to have a different relationship with debate, even if white people think it's unfair. Any limits arguments will impact in the first place. Our whole argument is not expanding the topics necessarily good because you can always read your affirmative on the negative and check back as to why resolution focus is good, which means that even if we expand the limits a little bit, that you should still vote affirmative because those expansions are necessary to things that the affirmative form of education. The frames of attraction argument turn educational legalization doesn't empower advocacy. They ignore the flexibility of liberalism that makes balance possible in the first place. Emphasizing flexibility of internment mobilization is key to solve. Emphasizing the distinction between internment and mass incarceration ignores liberalism's rhetorical tactics to flout legal definitions. The technical framing of internment as something for non-residents was legitimate when Japanese Americans were framed as quote non-aliens, allowing them to be considered outside the legal domain of the United States in the first place. That's canon 16 in terms of the described incarceration of individuals perceived as proposing a threat to a nation to move or occupy persons who are nationals of a nation, which one of the United States is that where the United States government called Japanese Americans in prison non-alien to circumvent any public responsibility for failing to uphold the rights guaranteed to Japanese and non-American citizens in the Constitution. Picks are bad in a voting issue. First, it kills me by forcing us to debate ourselves on doctrinal components of the affirmative. They just kick frames of attraction into 2 hour cause by arguments against ourselves. Steals the word of ground and encourages shallow debate. Second is the ability to wrestle this model debate model of testing justifies arbitrary and minute counterparts, which incentivizes white people to police black people or people of color with the words that they choose to use, which is impossible to predict. And obviously, by the labor gets that first subtraction allows to take labor for the performance of the 1EC and be rewarded for you. Ask yourself, what is the relationship between the Chinese at the bottom of the 1EC and you? Affirming in the first place, the first argument about internment being bad. First of all, the jackal dissent should frame the large majority of this offense because this thesis about rewriting history is our argument about the way that particular narratives of internment get naturalized through history. All of their arguments are in the context of the Japanese American Citizens League, who literally get to define what internment is, which is that process of pathologization, which says that your relationship relationship to impairment should have been more positive. You should have tried to fashion yourself into a more civic subject, which is particularly the narrative that all their offense produces in the first place. There, permutation do both. You should think of this argument as to pick out of them in the pick, even if their model test is because they shouldn't get rewarded for it. As white people, Asian communities obviously are already discussing tensions like these, so there's no reason why they should get access to it. So they will never be the ones doing the talking or doing the work anyway. You don't get to animate these conversations for white people if you're not going to be doing any of the work. Impact the pick can't solve the framing of giving me the skills to link up with other people better to improve my ability to speak my own violence is the development narrative. We can improve it. It improves that nominal increase in level of education, mobilizes communication, which is imperial in form. That's 15 academia on a fundamental level, shares with military. It's like those transparency, connectivity, communication, and certain tendencies for core world people, places, language, translate, legal words to world, universal addressability, and prime logic, simulation, dissimulation, research, trends with our implicating an increasingly direct economic social situation where globally high technical social fragmentation that races the possibility of coming to the academy with radical optimistic here, the creation of awareness among policymakers for international license for the purpose of communication and social change. Martha Carter, social change. Williams' evidence doesn't presume them as white people getting credit for doing these things. It just says that people on the left should check themselves more often, but that doesn't mean that the form through which they have chosen to do that is neutral or something that they should get credit for.
We'll take Rob.
Where is 50 marked?
Social change for the purposes of communication and social change.
Where? So just not the last line.
I think not the last line, but there's like a. Nah, there's a lot of shit out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like
It's just formatted.
6:05.
Ready?
Yep.
6:03.
Alright. You good?
Mm-hmm.
First question is, what is about debate that establishes subjectivity and how?
So we have so the internal link between interment and debate that we have is about performance, right? So our argument is the thing that connects them is a demand for a particular type of performance to fashion the self into a better civic subject, not simply by, willing it, but rather in terms of interment, putting them in particular classes, teaching them particular things, saying the pledge, etc. These are behaviors that become naturalized, such that Chambers' lesson is like every aspect of political engagement, i.e. individuals engaging in debate, is not a neutral form of participation, but rather saturated by that relationship to respectability, to being a civic agent, to proving your loyalty in order to gain access to the benefits of debate, etc.
How does debating about, how is reading an app which advocates government action the same as loyalty to the state?
Because it's about performance, right? It's not about the content of the thesis, right? Which is going to be the offense that I'm going to go for against your topic version of the app. It's not about what the thesis or the law itself can solve, but rather what our performance and engagement in it within debate looks like in the first place. What are the parameters for that engagement? What can we possibly produce from that resistance? Which is that whole orientation away from fairness, we should just preserve debate for the sake of debate, but rather question, how can we use debate in a way that is more accessible, but also better to understand particular aspects of things like executive authority, of things like the topic.
How does the negative predict how the app will negate the resolution?
So I think that there's two levels to answer the argument. First is that you don't have to predict how the affirmative would negate the resolution, because you always get to say and defend the resolution is good on the negative, which checks back against all your limited predictability arguments. Because if it is true that there will be teams that run to the margins and don't talk anything about the resolution, then it will be very easy for you to easily outweigh that defending the resolution is good, affirmative action.
How can we easily outweigh what the AF said if we have no idea what it was and are just defending some kind of example of the res? I just don't understand how that.
Too small, they'll be too unpredictable, they'll not change the status quo, etc. If that is true, then you should easily beat those arguments going for defending the resolution is good.
So going for topicality against that is what you're saying.
Not what I said. Wait. You could read your app on the neg, which is different from the topicality.
How do we easily outweigh if we don't know what the content of the app is? People run new apps all the time with I just don't. How do we know? How can we have a good test against the app?
If they're saying the SQO is good, you just have to say the SQO is bad.
Are you saying the SQO is good?
I know, we're saying restrictions are bad. We don't think restrictions are good, so you could defend
Well, you're obviously not defending the SQO. Okay. How does your model solve all these disads if it forces teams to defend the res half the time?
It does not force anyone to defend the res. It's the whole point of our argument.
Okay, so then how do you solve neg versus neg debates where the team not defending the res doesn't want to defend the res? How do they respond and test the app if they can't predict that and they're not defending the res?
That's what we call KDK debate. You read structural criticisms of things like pessimism. Negating our negation is what David Glass uses. That's the third process of negation. You can read critiques that obviously critique our negation of the topic.
603.
Need your water. Do you need anything from me?
I just kind of want to get water.
Got it in early. This 1099 shit. I think I got it early.
miss an order when I was out?
We're
waiting
missing a judge.
Oh, nice.
I was gonna say if Andrew's out, can I go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Frame subtraction within the case. Alright, is everyone good?
Give me like 2 seconds. It's just down there.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm good to go. Thank you for waiting.
Okay. Evaluate the debate through the lens of the alt. Evaluate it as a pick out of some of their frames. The only question is the value of what they've done in the moments that we critique. The role of the judge is to be an evaluator of frames. The purpose of the ballot is to identify places for improvement and refinement, not a flat yes-no choice about overarching desirability. This is a global model. We also get to conditionally narrow through the 2 in our and subtract new 2AC frames. Our model optimizes praxis. Elements of the 1EC are obviously correct, like harm area identification, but nuanced questions of tactical response require specific balanced testing of each part of their strategy. Every strategy has benefits and downsides, but the worst strategy of all would be to make the curricular choice to not consider those nuances. Praxis outweighs because it's critical to make any purpose of the case effective. That's Williams. We developed this in the 1EC, which means they shouldn't get any new 1AR theory arguments. It solves the case. You can agree with the vast majority of their speech, but vote negative to decline specific frames. They have no defense of many parts of their speech for the overall solvency claim, and our specific net benefits turn the case so the alt alone is able to solve better. Now, the line by line, the internment argument, vote negative to reject framing post-memory as a refusal to forget internment and instead orient your politics around the analytic lens of mass incarceration. They read a card on this, but this card is not comparative between the 2 terms. Only we have that evidence. Their term is a euphemism that soothes the horror of mass incarceration in the gentle, dispassionate word of internment. It turns absolvency because post-memory operates only through refusal to forget injustice, but their term papers it over. Their subtle acceptance of the view of the oppressor makes future violence more likely. Additionally, imprisonment isn't just a physical state. It extends to the social condition where the reality of incarceration is obscured by the web of euphemisms created by the language of internment. They say that it's a form of legalized education. Our argument is not about legal tactics, rather about the way in which language has precise meanings and the way in which their use of language reframes those meanings. The card says functionally nothing that they read on this point. It just says that internment is a term that means things. That doesn't mean that mass incarceration doesn't mean different things that are that doesn't also mean different things. Now, the Hicks are good. 1, nuanced, and 1 is nuanced. They force unhelpful extremes like impact turns that miss key points that clash and create an impossible neg burden when they can leverage many good themes against a few portions that we can turn. That's anti-educational unfair. 2 is praxis. Critique of frames is necessary. Every left movement is differentially effective, but making the choice to not consider details is worse. That's the Williams evidence that was impacted out in the overview. 3rd, it's fair. They chose the 1EC. They should defend it. There's literature defending everything, and unconstrained pre-round choice raises the bar, letting them off the hook, creates shallow advocacy and argumentative irresponsibility. You should err negative. It's not a voting. You should reject the argument, but vote negative on the case turn alone. The conditionality portion of the argument, we get it between multiple off-case and to consolidate subtraction for the 2, and our conditionality of frames is uniquely justified, even if other forms aren't. It's reciprocal and inevitable. The 1EC advanced 9 minutes of observations. The 2AR won't extend them all. Time pressure forces argument selection and development. Consolidation is key to depth in education. It's key to fairness. No plan gives them strategic flexibility to narrow narrow and shift. We need to move with them and respond as arguments change. Testing, defending arguments from both the left and the right refines their position and improves praxis, which is Williams. All is worse. Denying conditionality encourages hardline strategies with less occasion. It's not a unique tool of white people nor advocacy's identities. The AF will narrow their arguments, which proves it's possible and not exclusively white. They say the ground argument, there's no impact to this. The only reason why ground would conceivably matter is a reason why testing or fairness matters, which means they've just conceded the impact level of the T debate to us, and it's going to be a problem for them there. Either way, it's justifiable and fair because they can just defend the things that they did in advance of this debate. They took a lot of time to write their 1AC. Obviously, they should be able to defend it. They say that it's infinite regressive. If we can win a link and a reason why that link is bad, then that is the only burden that you should evaluate. Now they say that we can't capture their performance. This is an independent frame that we are subtracting out of it. Presumes a regressive understanding of discourse as static and intention that's been disproven by waves of theoretical advancement and rhetorical studies. Attempting to combine and restrict the meaning of performance renders their speech powerless, which turns the case and denies the excitability of speech, which is critical to progressive reappropriation, challenge systems of oppression. Young 11 discourse. Latest laws to students are likely adopt in self-observing fashion. Many practices run contrary. For example, teams will contend their opponents cannot just answer the performance. Teams contend opponents attempt to capture is inauthentic. However, these claims are problematic. Intentions cannot control speech because it is constantly repeatable as more. Outside the argument, all become multiple. Others continue with citations. Very conditioned discourse has effect privileging intention. Attempt to restrict the infinite meanings of performance. Intentions cannot control meaning because we cannot read the mind. Communication always expresses more, and belief is never fully present to the unconscious. A gap between sincerity and utterance is necessary for language to always have agency and ability to master performances. Does not mark failure. It serves as radical potential. Without a gap, discourse is fixed. However, if a gap does exist, words can be irreappropriated. New use demonstrate exclusive nature and produces contestation over racist or misogynist discourse, turning a term against itself through reappropriation. Terms lose harmful effect and can be used in new and more powerful ways. Rejecting speech has little to curb force of discourse attempts lock in place and injure speech, preserving power and arresting reworking. It also double turns their arguments on T because the theory argument is a form of policing. You should reject the desire to exclude picks and affirm a strong theory of discursive agency. Young in 11 teams target picks are insincere plagiarism, fake or parasitic cover, unregulated with intention, undermine citationality and play of discourse. This is what without citationality, strategic and centralized identities, so the shortcomings becomes nearly impossible. Productive achievements of gender and racial identities as repaired would likely be excluded. There seems greater disadvantage of the attempts to restrict the beliefs and sincere performances. Resignification operates as sites for productive contestations over exclusiveness of identities. Desire to exclude picks should be rejected to maintain the strong theory of discursive agency. Now they say also that the affective elements are going to somehow matter. This is another frame that we're subtracting out of. First, our defense. If their argument is just affect good, then everything has affect. It's about how you intend to perform. It's not about how you intend to perform. It's about unknown reactions to performance. It's impossible to know their affect beats our affect because every listener interprets something differently. Two is that reprioritizing affect helps the far right. Maybe it wins them this debate, but next round a judge could drop someone for their dress or tone of voice. Affect feels important now, but prioritizing it allows late stock issues judges to come through and reject any alternative style of evidence, or because people are reading too fast or too slow. It's true out of debate. The left is correct about content, but the right isn't. Prioritizing affect gives the right a tool. Think about how Trump has said everything racist and nothing meaningful, but people still say he talks tough, and that's the reason why they adhere to him. Now, the Jackal argument that it's not an attempt to rewrite history. We read evidence from other people. It's not just Lena and I's idea, and it's not an attempt to pathologize or change the narrative, except in the way that is supported by the substantive portion of our critique. If we win the substantive portion of our critique, you should reject all of their arguments about how that should just be rejected because it's intrinsically oppositional to the way they frame the role of debate in 1AC cross-sex. The permutation proper links or severs the alt is app minus, including frames we critique links, not including them. Severs isn't a voting issue because it incentivizes ambiguity and destroys any specific engagement. They shouldn't get a perm because the debate is about testing methods. If they win this, you should just kick the alternative. Now, they say that they're going to pick out of us. Voting negative does not endorse this. First, we acknowledge our positionality and did so in the 1C. Williams in the 1C was a defense of white participation in discussions of race and foregrounds or privilege. Their argument is just that we didn't mention our identity enough, or the way they like, which is a sliding goalpost that's impossible to make. Second, is that this misunderstands the role of debate in the judge. Debate is not a vote for one team's ideas or another, but a testing of theirs. If the 1AC isn't the best course of action, you should vote negative. It's not an endorsement of us as people. It's a statement that their argument should be better. Third is all of this is contrary to how James characterizes the role of debate in cross-sex. According to them, it is useful to have the test. So the role of debate is to test ideas and learn how power functions. To say our effort to test their strategies inherently a view from nowhere is a double turn with the idea they explained in cross-sex that apparently there are productive strategies that we, MSUGS specifically, could have read against them. If there was no value to having two white people from MSU test this idea, then they should have framed the 1EC cross-sex and the role of the act differently, but at this point, they're stuck with it. It's also independently offense that we can subtract. Procedural emphasis on identity self-isolates into political failure. It's better to prioritize the substance of the argument. Stevens in 16, identity informs politics, but it doesn't define the procedural emphasis on voice with that scrutiny and political substance. Make sure the tokenization, not emancipation, not all living wants to rise of Latino and an Asian crash to the torture members carried forward by the first class and diversity given makes waterboarding no less fatal. All narratives about what you do not, who do you are. Objection to fetishism of identity does not mean I don't care about race. It's a struggle. Changing people's shifts ideologies, creates new practices and institutions. It's imperfect people striving to make the world a perfect world. There's no collective struggle for the offended who self-isolate their way to irrelevance. Now they say the impact turn in the hoofed evidence. There's no link to it, or it links to them because it's about the possibility of communication and the idea that value can engaged for productive engagement with argument, which is definitely a value that they adhere to, as proven by the fact that they're trying to make their arguments articulable to you and flowable in the first place. But the underlying thesis of this card is that the academy is always bad, which is also offense for us. The university isn't monolithic, but we have offense because they lock in the status quo they critique. That's Tolson. In 15, the university has endured not because it was a rigid hierarchical system, but because universities have never realized anything like universal knowledge. Dismiss the university as your kind of training to overlook the actual people at this particular moment. We need motivating ideals to orient institutions that are self. The university embodies virtues. This calls both inside and outside. Hold your structural accounts of the university as a system lacking human agency endowed with meaning, offer no compelling approach for a future. This attitude is a capitulation to the absolute system. The university relies on the decisions of actual people, not the abstract totalizing institution. Now they say the Williams evidence doesn't assume us taking credit. We're not taking credit for it. Our frame subtraction argument is just an attempt at argumentative engagement. It's a necessary strategy to avoid people just running to impact charge, which was isolated above and which is clearly worse. Also, if you're right about this argument, then on the case and your answer on the ballot case, that the ballot is a mechanism in order to marshal engagement with the affirmative is the only way they can beat the ballot case, which means that which means that giving us credit, if that is indeed what frame subtraction is doing, is the only way to incentivize any kind of engagement with the 1AC. The case proper. I already impact charged a lot of the case, but post-memory fails. One, it overempowers the current generation to take and recreate history, diminishes the experiences of the previous generation, and re-articulates past trauma as a trauma of current people, which prevents escape. They say that internment is a structure of civil society. It also refers to a specific event, which is what their own certain evidence is in the context of in terms of remembering those events. Second, it prevents ethical self-reflection. Remembrance can work, but post-memory attempt to use it to shape subjectivity in a way that prevents coping with trauma. Now, the law can do good things. Saito specifically...
Okay. Ready?
Yep.
What is mass incarceration?
Mass incarceration refers to people being kept in confined spaces, being held down by certain legal acts.
Okay. Your definition is people being held in confined spaces. People,
I mean,
who are the people?
I mean,
does it matter if they're citizens?
I don't think that's relevant to our frame subtraction argument, which is about the sanitizing term.
Let me ask another question. You picked out of two other parts of the 2AC. What are they? One was affect, one was identity. Is that correct?
There are more than two. We picked out of the idea that we cannot capture your performance.
You picked out of an idea that you can't capture a performance. Okay.
Yeah, we picked out of affect the idea that performance should be something that the judge evaluates.
What does it mean to pick out of affect if you've just said that every speech that people give has affect?
We picked out of the prioritization of affect in the judge's decision. The idea that somehow some part of the performance of the 1AC is intrinsic to your embodied performance and that our inability to capture it is a solvency deficit to pick is the prioritization.
The next one, the identity argument is that identity is irrelevant. We should focus on argumentative substance. Is that fair?
It's not that identity is irrelevant, but that identity should be analyzed in the context of how it implicates argument, and ultimately the fact that like a bunch of white people have done important anti-racist work and a bunch of people of color have obstructed that work is something we should evaluate in terms of the context.
You say it's a justification for
and we have the university thing. Just
the university. Yeah, I know.
Okay, sorry.
I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
The university argument, I suppose. What compelling, I guess, how do you get out of the university? What do you think is exportable from your model? Oh, sorry, no, fuck that. The Williams evidence. The justification for white people getting to critique people of color movements. What is that justification?
There is a role that white anti-racists potentially have to play.
Why should we trust that you are white anti-racist? Why should we trust that you have good intentions for the affirmative?
I think if we win our substantive arguments, that should be preferred. Rejecting our arguments
if you win your substantive arguments, why should those be preferred? Over the form that those arguments take.
If we win based in our evidence, which is written from written by a variety of people.
Variety of Asians.
Right, yes. If we win our substantive arguments about reasons why the affirmative methodology are bad, our argument is that should not just be excluded because we are white.
Paint me the picture of the 1AC, what the judges vote for, absent those three things that you picked
out. Because
you are clearly affectless, as you know, proven. So I guess would it be you reading the 1AC? Would it be you two performing the 1AC? It's
endorsing the idea of the 1AC and the content of the 1AC.
It's extremely abstract. How is that fucking praxis? You picked out of the idea that affect is good.
It is, one, this is a new standard that's being introduced for us, but two, it is absurd.
You said what is praxis? What is praxis?
What is praxis? It's the idea that we have different strategies to counter oppression and that we should test and consider what makes those strategies more or less effective.
What is your strategy?
What is our strategy? Well, we will consolidate throughout the debate based on a variety of things. One example of a comprehensive frame subtraction argument that we could go for is that we endorse and don't disagree with any of the 1AC, but disagree with your argument that we can't capture performance. Like, that is an example of a link we could go for.
T.
there a speech doctor?
No.
Cool.
No doubt.
No doubt.
Cool.
Anyone not good? Ask yourself what part of us negating them is valuable if the one you see in and of itself constitutes the refusal to forget the injustices of internment it sought to achieve. If the negative has no role in what they're trying to accomplish, why waste their time debating us when they could have just talked to you or gathered up a crowd? Our answer is that debate offers a unique opportunity for revolutionary praxis. The powerful incentive to win can be geared towards rigorous iterative strategy testing, but only if they can be prepared for it. Thus, our interpretation is the AF should only win if they prove an example of the resolution is desirable via any method they choose. The sole way the debate can be utilized to respond to U.S. imperialism and racism is by forging potential solutions in the fire of rigorous clash. They agree that's proven by 1AC cross-sects where they say the purpose of the negative is to test ideas. The validity of an argument can only be determined through sustained clash with conflicting claims whereby one emerges stronger. So absent comparison against a well-prepared opponent, it's possible to evaluate the actual effectiveness of their strategy, which is conceded thesis argument that 2AC has absolutely no answer to besides the counter-interpretation. Now, it's not just terminal defense. Winning on untested strategies dooms their political utility. Their model, not ours, is the ultimate cruel optimism where the AF is tricked into overestimating the efficacy of their strategy, which is worse than not reading it because it makes them sitting ducks against the inevitable onslaught of challenges faced when advancing their method in real life. Not having a broader picture of the unintended consequences of post-memory runs a high risk of replicating their impact, which means you should vote negative within their role with the ballot. Now, externally testing outweighs. It's the only outcome participants learn deeply enough to actualize the specific context of round is fleeting surface level and involves subjects that can be discussed in any venue, but the process of clash teaches valuable skills necessary in every area of life, no matter how they're used. It's key to generate better political movements with critical analysis of state power, even if it turns out that post-memory is really the solution. Being adept at advocacy and argument comparison is always useful for empowering whatever movement might take shape. Now, the foreigners within and governance dissents don't apply. Our model doesn't require them to prove their ideal subjects because it doesn't preclude them from reading their AF, just that the ballot only goes to the team that defends if they defend a topical action that's airs and group their arguments about fairness. It doesn't appear in the 1NC and was never our standard. We don't make debate more fair for white debaters. Their fate in your hands is not unique and absolutely not solved by their model. Neg theory doesn't solve our offense. It destroys limits. Allowing cases to negate the resolution makes virtually everything topical. There isn't an example of a single chaos that they exclude. Critiques of action based in any theory from neolib to security, Sekal, anti-blackness, Heidegger, etc. would be topical, plus asks to take issue with any one component of the resolution, like critiquing nuclear focus or the history of surveillance, is proven by their AF. The thesis of the 1DC is that internment is relevant because it was left out of the topic. That would include anything meaningful that was omitted from the resolution, setting no boundary whatsoever. It completely wrecks testing because critical assessment occurs through clash, which depends on arguments that directly conflict with each other. A reverse sequence where the neg goes first ensures lack of clash because the neg turned AF will have no earthly idea how their opponent will negate the resolution. Their explanation in cross-text is atrocious at proving how just reading on the AF, reading our AF on the neg resolves this. The AF neg model is the only thing that creates a stable axis around resolutional action, which is the only thing that ensures reasonably well-prepared teams with well-researched assignments. The neg makes the point of stasis constantly shifting, which undermines the depth of debate and the rigor of the test. But this does link to their offense because it forces them, because it forces debaters to defend the res half the time, which is role-playing, and it establishes some limit, which links to governance. They can't quantify the difference between this and our interpretations. Their adherence to certain debate norms and resistance of others proves it's possible to be topical while resisting other norms. This isn't about in-round abuse against us. It's a question of whose model creates better testing. Now, ironically, reading their affirmative on the neg solves their offense because it lets them talk, because it injects all of their scholarship and debate and lets them talk about post-memory, which the majority of their offense is based on. It's based on their scholarship and education being good, not about accessibility, not about accessibility arguments. The state of exception presumes that presumes the topic excludes a discussion of Korematsu, which is false. There are many ways it can be gathered and integrated into advocacy and the resolution. They can do things like end first use as anti-racist practice informed by Hiroshima, and deference to the travel ban grounded by the Chinese Exclusion Act, or Hormatsu, restrict tariffs on Asian countries with a racism advantage, and judicial reference and states built up to overturn Korematsu. Plus, there are tons of creative options that offer topical access and awards. They're just heads like ending and the NFU that implodes NPT as sabotage, breaking nuclear colonialism, ending surveillance for everyone except Asian Americans, which implodes racism through over acceleration, reading and advantages that destroy the economy and states' first movements to overthrow the state. This proves these sort of arguments disprove their argument that any topical version could justify further naturalization because topical versions of the F can implode the state and solve the extra legal arguments they're talking about. Each of these axes is a similar look based on holding their exclusion and education arguments. They don't have to be part of legalism or state bag arguments. Don't answer this. They only prove that there's balanced ground and plenty of things to say for the neg. Not that they can be debated. Now the large majority of their next few arguments are answered by the overview, but the next just I can't remember the name of it that they made. There was the like burnout stuff. I already answered that because it proves that testing is the only way to put the skills into action that they could these means described for our interpretation under the only way that they can understand, the only way they can develop resistance and understand the state is and develop effective resistance is if it is tested. The governance DA was answered above, but like Anderson answers that. All of the body implicates performance stuff was answered in the 2 and C. They don't solve Rev v. Rev debates because the neg still doesn't know how to properly test the app-specific disagreement within the res. It still doesn't allow for effective tests because we can't prepare predictability as the basis for all of that, and it can only be only the resolution is predictable.
9:29.
Yeah. Can you give us a moment just to pull it up? Starting now.
You need a moment for it?
Oh, to start prep, but we started. We're at like 10 seconds into it now. What's up, dude?
Yeah, we should do some first
Okay. Argument test. Can we do the
Yeah.
Okay. Truth test. two arguments that they talked about. The A factor is
arguments so massive. How do you pick out of things when it happens? What exactly what part of the one is really picking?
But
Like it proves that the practice doesn't make any sense. And the identity argument links hard as fuck to governance and the anti-evidence because it's like focused on substance of debate and identity only insofar as it proves the argument is our argument about the constraint possibilities of substance. And then with the others, only has something that can be explored. Their skills are fucked and their practice is not fucked. And then just be like, who controls the direction of this argument? Because it means that even if you have a direction out, you give the comparison. It's not going to be manifest that. Which proves a governance and proves one facts. 330.
Sure. You can settle it.
332.
It'll be the F. Topicality. Brain subtraction.
Any, doc?
Nope. Yeah, no document.
May I get this? Oh, there's. Awesome. Anyone not ready to start? Post-memory is a method through which the 1AC refuses to forget Korematsu logics of determine as a civilizing process not separate from debate, but rather a structure of engagement, and debate looks like for Asian debaters. Two impacts. One is precarity, the state of exception, produce the false promise of political subjectivity for Asians that can be revoked at any time through the rhetoric of national security, yellow peril it makes, and mess with the political spheres fundamentally violent because no matter how much Asians invest in this stability, yellow skin still serves the justification or sacrifice of national security, beast point, and psychological violence. Political engagement becomes special, returning the Asian person's yellow power, model minority, and force Asians to aspire to be ideal citizens, subject to prove their loyalty to the state of feeding against democratic liberalism and calling the possibility of nation resistance outside the state are stricken evidence at the bottom of the 1AC frames. So when you think about solvency, we're not all here for the same reason. Do you think there is a space for policy? We think it's space, think what it means for any political subject. No, I'm all I know. Focus by readers diminish past experience, but rather traumas passed on transgenerationally, where Asians have a sense of trauma but don't actually recollect the events that actually happened. They also continue that you should just believe, Jeff, that this is the process of how trauma gets passed on generationally. It allows for creative self-recreation, not because when you understand that governance is one that actually structures Asian political subjectivity, allows you to create something else. The TV. At the top, they conceded our battle framing argument. If they are correct that the affirmative structure, research incentives for negative teams and voting app artificially inserts Korematsu and the executive order 9066 into the research curriculum policy debate and forces policy debaters to our side of the library, which is good because it combats the pervasive national amnesia that undergirds the internal process. Basically, if we win that these claim about our app, then free becomes a secondary concern. Remember, you can't vote for clash in the abstract. If we win that the research curriculum replicates governments, that's sufficient reason to vote affirmative. The truth testing arguments. One, it links to guilt is that Asians are always held to a higher standard to prove violence or claims legitimate. That calls to discount the one they see as untrue replicates the way that all Asians are presumed guilty, Burkhead created off their race, i.e., the way the Japanese were determined based on just a race. This is a logic of state of exception that drives Asians to legitimate themselves in the eyes of the law. Two is our truth testing is obviously solved by our mild debate. We maintain the court of resolution of question just delimits higher trace, which means that your dialogue labor, dialogue debates will provide us with areas of improvement in our argument, creating good advocates. It's just a question of if the negative team is willing to engage in arguments or not. They were unprepared for this debate. They chose to be unprepared for it. They improved examples of teams who are willing to do research to engage in our apps, include USCKW from last night, Iowa, GL, Berkeley, and our kids video, etc. The old data truth testing doesn't do our strategy. This is just lazy debating. Our testing is fundamentally possible. They've just indicated that testing could fundamentally be bad for a strategy without actually having the specific internal indicator, specific scenario for that strategy. Don't fundamentally default to that. The foreigners within this that extended argument is a critique of the development of what you do versus what you justify. This is a tactic of whiteness to overlook individual minoritarian bodies for the sake of the greater good. The coming crisis of World War II justifies the sacrifice of Japanese Americans, and the crisis of debate's breakdown justifies the sacrifice of Jeff. This is the logic of the state of exception proves that their illegal policy debate replicates the logic of Section 966. They say fairness, fundamentally arbitrary, only replicates powerful white people because it maintains the procedures of the status quo. The counter-interpretation you should extend it. The F can either affirm or negate the resolution. The negative can either defend the resolution, read the topical event, counterpoint, or negate or negation. The resolution still defines the terms of the debate, but we limit cycle trains to allow more creative forms of debates, forcing people to defend a resolution that they don't find morally justifiable, even more written is bad. It creates forms of psychological violence. Say you don't know what people will read against you when you are affirmative when they read case, which proves that just reading your affirmative on the negative resolves all of the unpredictability portions because they still need to be negation of the resolution. They say the counter-interpretation links the covenants. No, we don't force people to defend the affirmative on the negative. They can they'll read the affirmative or negative if they want to, but they can still negate or negation. The switch on debate argumentation 1. Affirming is key. Your whole argument is that the resolution refusing to discuss core amounts would also obviously being is key to refusing as a starting point. Otherwise, the monetization just reactionary tool we lose for being literally a link to omission. 2 is we impact turn in our class evidence, and the thesis for 1 is psychic violence impacts that you shouldn't force people to affirm the rest if it's fine for them. It proves our all debate still self-spares. The next argument here is the launch list of top diversity after she talks about the 1 in R1 is that it links to a shift. They said arguments that you only want top diversity app so you can have links to the ESR kind of plan in the politics and which one it means that only affirming the app without a plaintext actually gets into engage in the core content over affirmative reading with a plaintext doesn't. The beast of what is the myth of the mono-minority is that you've taken Chef as an unruly Asian subject and trying to rehabilitate him in order to the mono-minority that can research the fundamental policy nuances in a better, more effective way. Arguments that this avowed process that you should reject all the top diversity apps about imploding the state and links to a core optimism of this at which the net benefit to our counter-interpretation. You know, the group theonis one that naturalizes the relations of interment. You have no roadmap for Asians to actually effectuate this. For change that your top diversity app talk about which fundamentally creates forms of psychological violence and fundamental self-hatred. Beast of point and the beast of point for the net benefit to our counter-interpretation state of exception. This and our argument is that executive authority can be exerted extra legally, which means that funding our resistance through a legalist lens only fundamentally leaves us unprepared for when the executive ignores the legal protections. What's up? Okay, KVK debate 1. They have completely continued the 1 in R. Having this state be a possibility for every debate colonized political measure in which we make the state inevitable arguments that we should use debate as a creative space to understand what social organization will be like outside the realm of the state. Is that good? There you go. Go to frame structure. Go to frame structure. Hooked evidence to control the direction of their fundamental role. The judge in a pick argument. Their use of a global model for testing replicates the development narrative. You use communicative technologies in the academy in order to improve the other through advocacy skills, objectifies the other, and justifies humanitarian interventions in the name of bettering the other in the first place. We are a critique of the form of your model of praxis. Your praxis doesn't make any sense because picking out of ideas, but also it says that it fundamentally proves the other in the first place. I.e., these conversations can be negotiated within Asian communities and fundamentally doesn't require you to talk about that in the first place. Extend the camp evidence. Your focus on specific discourse is fundamentally bad because it ignores the way that the flexible nature of legal definitions that liberals have used to justify and putting Asians in the state of exception. For example, Asians were citizens before the except for 9 or 6 states, but then they were transformed into domestic non-aliens. Your definition of mass incarceration of people being fundamentally having bodies fundamentally be in jail doesn't grapple with whether those people are citizens or non-citizens, which means you naturalize determine us picks are bad because they're infinitely aggressive. They cannot check against white people just fundamentally picking out of one word, which justifies the policing of languages, which fundamentally is fundamentally bad. The jackal to that extent that you're indebted to the Japanese American Physicists League as per your narrow your beliefs and more evidence, which justifies and replicates the pathologization that Jackal does. I.e., Jackal was held up as with the white institutional support as the Japanese American Citizens League, as the Japanese American Community Organization, which replicates forms of violence that pathologize other Asians not being fidelity enough to the Constitution. The young arguments about discourse. It's similar to white people saying that there's no such thing as one sided culture, which justifies cultural appropriation. This is victim blaming that you should blame just for the way that white people will be parasitic in this debate. They say we don't start a theory. No, we're not reading rules about what you said was violent, but rather we impact turning education. Affect doesn't make any sense. How do you pick out of the idea of affect when affect is understandable? The last argument I need to make is the Stevens evidence about picking out of identity, but it assumes that we should separate argument from identity, but all the case evidence indicates that performance determines arguments.
511.
frame subtraction T in the case. Right. Is everyone good? Frame subtraction solves all of the 1EC offense. We endorse the entirety of the 1EC except for their justification of critiquing the university, which occurred in the 2EC, which means that there's no offense intrinsic to the 1EC that our argument does not access, and we have external offense that we can leverage against all their impact turns, which James doesn't have any impact defense to in the 1AR, which means we just outweigh on a question of comparative risk. We have defense later in this 2NR to all of their offense, but they have no defense in the 1AR to any of our offense. You should not allow any new 2A arguments. This is a dropped 1AR argument, which dictated why I went for frame subtraction in this 2NR. Now, 2 impacts. One is that the university can do a limited number of good things. Their hoofed evidence is that any attempt to engage in academia reproduces militarized violence, but that is just wrong. The university also produces a lot of knowledge that is anti-militarist, i.e. exactly when the hoofed themselves writing a book from within the university about how apparently effed up the university is marshaling and using the resources of the university in order to engage in those types of conversations. The fact that there are entire sociology and anthropology departments, African-American studies departments, etc., that engage in literature-based debates about methodology proves that the university can be used to fund and influence and create positive political work, as proven by the fact that a lot of their 1EC authors are also writing from within the context of the university. But second, they see the political. Obviously, there are problems with the university co-opting labor or marshaling it for militarism, but attempting to disengage from the university wholesale is the worst possible alternative to that. Instead, you should use the resources of the university to attempt to infiltrate it. That's the Tolston evidence. They didn't have any link de-articulation in the 1AR, which means they're stuck with it. It outweighs any solvency deficit because it turns all the reasons that the university is violent. They also lay on the hoofed evidence such as intervention, etc. That was above. Now, the hoofed argument proper. One, it's an analogy to say that it's a humanitarian intervention. That's flawed. You should reject the leaps of logic that occur between our argument saying that we should improve things and attempting to invade Iraq. Second is that it links just as much to them. According to them, the purpose of debate is testing. Engaging with their argumentative strategy. There's no reason why our form of testing or testing in the form of the pick is uniquely worse for that. It's the same purpose of debate that they adhere to out of the 1EC cross-six. Now, they are not going for the internment link argument. They've conceded that we get to conditionally narrow things throughout the debate. There's not a conditionality bad argument in the 1AR. The picks argument. One, Williams justifies it. I articulated this a lot in the block. Don't make me reinvent the wheel here. Testing is important for the entirety of their strategy. If we can win a link argument and a substantive impact to it, then that's a reason to err negative. If we don't win a link argument and a substantive impact to it, then we're probably going to lose anyways, and we're probably going to lose anyways. Praxis outweighs because it's the only ultimate purpose of the affirmative. It's not just a question of the strategy in which they engage in. It's a question of refining the strategy of post-memory, which they said on framework. All of these iterations of debates are important to do that. The fact that there are substantive discussions, we are that form of substantive discussion. Second is that we're not policing language for civility. If we were, then you could clearly win on impact turns to the idea that we're policing for civility, but our argument is about what strategies and language should be used in order to obtain the best form of praxis, which is completely distinct. Now, the Young argument, their solvency deficit frame about not accessing performance is a frame that we are also subtracting out of, but is one that you can judge kick after the debate because they've conceded the thesis of conditionality. Intentionality and ownership of speech presume that what they say is theirs and attempt to police what we did by claiming it wasn't sincere. Denies that changes in rhetoric are based on argument, citation, and discussion of strategies for improvement. There are 2 impacts. One is the reappropriation of language. If we weren't able to refashion language of its original intention, some terms would still be violent slurs in every iteration, instead of moments where past violence is indicted and new possibilities of collective identity and personal pride are created. Second is idea refinement. Articles and ideas aren't developed in isolation, but in conversation with other ideas. Different fields of analysis wouldn't have moved beyond reductive units if it weren't for citation and discussion of the methodological flaws that are intrinsic to that. That's the Young evidence. It's not a form of cultural appropriation. It's not taking something that inherently belongs to another culture and using it as fashion, as something to advance us on an individual level. Our argument is that in the context of limited debates, we should be able to agree with a lot of the 1EC in order to avoid reductive debates about impact turns. They've conceded the 2NC theory analysis that absent frame subtraction, there's just so much good about the 1EC. It's impossible for us to tell Jeffrey that he's wrong about his strategy, about his core strategy, which means that we need a variety of tools in order to assess the affirmative. Otherwise, we just have to go for impact turns like racism good or attempting to disengage the law bad, which is ultimately reductive, doesn't get at the finer nuances of strategy or intrinsic left debates. It's also not perceived in the same way because it's about the purpose to which those frames are actually going to be put. Now, the affect argument, affect being inevitable, is non-responsive. It's about the prioritization of affect. The idea that their affect of performance is a solvency deficit is what we are critiquing. Because the very idea of that relies on the idea that performance should matter more than anything else. They've conceded that both in and outside of debate that produces worse effects, because it would allow judges in debate to drop people for their dress or tone of voice, which is clearly reductive and results in identity policing of debaters. And outside of debate, it allows the right to have absolutely no content, because apparently their communicative strategy is better than the left. That is net worse for politics and outweighs any residual offense that they have, because those things affect on a far wider scale and are far more specific to this space. Now, Jackal said the Stevens evidence answers it. Identity does inform argument. We still allow for arguments using lived experience as evidence, but argument is flatly saying that reject these white people's argument is bad. It forecloses possibly good ideas and artificially privileges bad one. It justifies taking Clarence Thomas's thoughts on affirmative action as representative of all black people, or allowing John Hughes torture memos to stand because they were written by a person of color. You should reject that, even if it's from a certain identity group. Now, they say that it's an attempt to pathologize and weaponize people against each other. That is inevitable under their model, because they want people to weaponize against each other in order to test different ideas. Either way, we're not going for any of the internment terms, which is what this is specifically contextualized to. It's not a form of pathologization, it's a form of argumentative engagement. That was the Williams evidence. Now, they say they say that it's negotiated within Asian American communities. Testing is good. If testing by MSU GS wasn't good, then why did you read this affirmative in this specific debate? The topicality page, we're not going for it. Counterinterpretation solves all of our offense. They haven't articulated an internal link to fairness, which means they don't have an argument on, theoretically, on picks back that they can go for in this 2-hour.
We have 3:32.
3:32.
Yeah. Okay. Starting now.
Okay, the concession is really that their theorization provided against the thing itself makes no sense. It presumes that our model of negation is predicated on identity, like critiquing of identity, which is not true, because they concede that KPA itself all of it off. Makes sense. As a theoretical frame, then you should do governance and not morals as the problem with the performance of their critical itself. Post-truth frame, I think a lot of the offense is just like the idea that the university can be good in some sense. Hey, it doesn't dispute that. It has nothing to do with it consecutively. When you take a link, like an argument that people can write books from the academy is irrelevant.
Like you can extremely flex to like their specific use of using it to measure
Because the whole presumption that people have access to university in the first place is not true, which are T-words. Right. So I think you should just do T-words.
That's not possible.
Because we have conceded what debated that.
Oh, actually, yeah, I really do feel like your precedent is just like non-invincible. The way that power relations function, the legitimate testing is.
Dude, they can technically build this lab.
But it's
That is a counter means that it solves all the problems. And it also case, T, and then the terms of that. Oh, started another year. Okay, everyone ready? Totally conceding the thesis of our case argument makes it really difficult for you to win in a pick argument. The one is here first post memory is a way to grapple with the historical legacy of Cormac to determine the way that it orients debate in the university of large post memory, and the reading of the one is a way for me to grapple with the resolution while refusing the logic of assimilation upheld by normative forms of engagement. This affirmation is a recertifying of intermittent topical discussions. Their interpretation will never allow us to interrogate the way that Asian political subjectivity is formulated because the topic of purpose omits things. There's two impacts. Step one, A's per character. The desire for you to affirm a particular model debate requires the sacrifice of Asian debaters. The whole argument is that access is predicated and granted to Asian debaters in the form of accommodation. But if we refuse to gain no accommodation, then our knowledge production becomes justifiably excluded, which is precisely the logic that they're going for in terms of their frame subtraction argument that Asian subjectivity is precarious and can be discarded at any time under the guise of benevolency, which is two fucking white people tell me what is better for myself. The second impact is psychological violence. The imposition of their argument of policing and replicates so it produces a particular type of Asian debater that often necessarily has to go through visible assimilation. Asians always have to prove their loyalty to the state and debate at large by reading things like plan, which is how internment gets naturalized. Their model forces me to either assimilate and uphold democratic visible or be painted as a disloyal Asian in the first place. All these arguments prove and disprove their thesis claim that debate is a neutral space to do ideal testing, and rather says that there are particular barriers to the way that process of embodiment and performance of the scholarship are implicated, which is a massive impact to the thesis of them being able to win the majority of their offense. The T argument, the concession of the counter-interpretation, means that they have very little defense to a lot of their justifications for why they get to read the pick, because the concession of things like the KVK debate arguments proves that there are alternative ways to test the affirmative that result in better forms of praxis that don't result in colonization of the imaginary, but their choice, active choice, means that you should be skeptical. It means that the direction of the hoofed evidence should be in line. Another piece of offense I'm going to extend is the mono-minority dissent, which is totally conceded. It says that testing in and of itself attempts to take disparate parts of Asian American experience in order to fit it into a more holistic and rational narrative in the first place, which you should obviously be skeptical of their model. The last argument that I'm going to extend is the guilt dissent, totally conceded in the two and now. Their model of truth testing is predicated on understanding as Asians have not as being too guilty. I replicate the logic of naturalization, where a jab was a jab, where you were presumed as not knowing what was better for you before presuming that you did, which was our whole argument about the way that paternalistic logic was. These are all conceded offensive frames to their model of testing in and of itself, which is our massive dissent that should outweigh the majority of the offense that they're going for. The subtraction dissent proper, the hoofed evidence extended. It's a massive impact turn to the thesis of their argument about praxis. It begs the question of what is the endpoint of their advocacy. Obviously, it's about producing white activists who are able to critique other people's. The hoofed evidence says that this replicates the developmental narrative of the university, where we are able to use academic spaces purely to test and critique people of color, to then go out and export and produce agents of the state that can do people of color. This proves our governance argument, which was also totally fucking conceded coming out of the 2&R. It means that you should be skeptical of the direction of a lot of the agents that they produce, because it's predicated upon producing white people who are able to be critically engaged in people of color, which with the hooped evidence is a massive critique of the thesis of this subtraction argument proper doesn't really make any sense. What does picking out of the hooped evidence mean for the solvency portion of the 1AC? What does it have to do with performance or relation? They are incredibly unspecific on what their alternative actually looks like, which means that you should presume that it's still needed through a process of performance, where the words that I speak are necessarily imbued with a different particular value in the first place. Our theory of governance answers back their no identity arguments in the first place, which also means that you should extend the thesis. Also means that their young evidence is linked to a victim blame argument, which is also totally conceded, because the idea that language is not something that can discursively be reappropriated in the first place blames black people and people of color, etc., for having their cultures commodified in the first place by white people saying, oh, this was never yours to begin with, which is exactly that justification. Look, all of their linked arguments should just be contextualized through our frame of governance, which means that you can be skeptical of quality offense to see the political argument. I'm not sure what the internal link is in the first place. If their argument is that we should use the university because it's good in some instances, that is our claim, but the one he problematizes that question of using the university in the first place, because debate, as an example of that, is not a neutral space, which is why the theorization of the 1AC is obvious obviously a prerequisite to being able to use the valuable parts of debate in and of itself in the first place. The argument that the hoofed evidence links to us obviously doesn't make any sense because the only thing they can export is the notion of praxis that's predicated off knowing more than people of color, which means that the non-uniqueness argument from the one ear that Asian people are already clearly discussing these things in the status quo we're having and negotiating these tensions means that you should be skeptical of the hoofed argument for their role in this conversation in the first place, because it means that they can only produce agents that think that they know better in the first place. The Williams evidence as justification. What the fuck do they think praxis is? Our argument is that your theorization doesn't produce agency. What is the relationship between the alternative and the affirmative proper, and what skills or what does that produce externally? Only the app has a theory that says that we give a way to engage with the structures of debate, which is obviously practice in and of itself because we have a theorization that is embodied and actualized through action in the first place. They have no explanation of what praxis is, which means that the framing of things like the affect pick as picking out of an idea of prioritizing affect, what the fuck does that look like in the context of implementation? How is that good praxis? What does that mean for praxis? What does that mean for resistance in the first place? They can't answer any of these questions, so you should presume that the attempt to get rid of and presume that there is no identity, presume that there is no affect, is precisely that move to naturalization of internment in the first place. The idea that internment, there was nothing bad about internment, but it was just a civic process of recapitulating subjects in the first place, is precisely that, and a move to naturalization, which you should be skeptical of. This argument refinement, the thesis of this argument refinement obviously links to the model minority dissent, and obviously links to the guilt dissent, because it presumes that idea refinement happens in a vacuum, that is just about the arguments we make, which is the thesis of the Stevens argument, which is fucking not true, because our governance evidence says that performance necessitates a production of it in the first place. The frame subtraction argument, or the Jackal arguments at the bottom are totally conceded. Their model replicates the notions of pathology that say that your model of testing is incomplete and you're holding us all behind, which is the exact logic that Jackal uses. They conceded that all of their evidence is by people from Jackal who have the power to narrate the way internment is represented as a process of something that is naturalized, as a process of something that made Asian people better, which means that the new tune our defense about not trusting John Yoo or whatever the fuck A is not only racialized, but B proves our arguments about Jackal predicating and the inevitability of right-wing feeling, the inevitability of governance to saturate political organizations that they think are liberatory.
Weaponization of affect to police people's identity.
This argument about the weaponization of affect to police people has A, no link to the affirmative, and B, it makes no fucking sense because all these arguments are non-unique. Obviously, people are already policed by that process of performance, but that proves why the absent necessary prerequisite to being able to navigate those things in the first place.
Yeah. Nice. Is this stream still on?
Yeah, I leave it on.
just telling them all.
out of it, so I don't know how to get back in the board.
Oh yeah, I don't know if there's a way to go back in, but here.
Oh, it doesn't sound like I. But.
Okay, the decision is a 3-0 for the affirmative.
I'll go first. A big part of my problem is that I'm just not really sure what I'm voting for, and I think this is, somewhat a problem with you setting this up as, we can be conditional and we can add and subtract what our frames are going to be, and they can change and throughout the round. You needed for me, I guess, to just kind of start at the beginning of the last speech and explicitly say, like, I'm not sure at the end, are you picking out of the word internment anymore? Is that still one of the picks? Is the affect pick never really made sense to me. I thought the cross-X on this was pretty devastating, and I would really like for some of that to be in the 1AR. I really wish that the 1AR would have started with referencing a lot of the great mileage that I think was made in the cross-X, but I mean, it's not like that's not part of the debate. And it's not like that stuff just goes away. And I think that you've got to recognize that when somebody has kind of asked you some questions that you might not have had the best answers to in the process, if that's the argument you're going to go for, then you need to sort of start by answering the, like, here's what we're going for, and here's what it means, and here's what the solvency looks like without it. And absent that work, it's really difficult to know what it is that I'm voting for you on. And I also sort of agree with the AF that I think that not going to the case arguments and sort of allowing their conception of the case. I mean, they've sort of said, here is our argument, here is our solvency, here is our claim, here is our impact, this is the way that we get to it. You've never specifically stated how you access that. I mean, you just sort of say, well, we get all the offense and we've got defense to their offense in sort of this vague way without any particulars, like, how do you access psychological violence? How do you access the specific things that they're talking about, that they're extending in each of those speeches, the state of exception? If you don't have the affect, if the affect is what's necessary as they're sort of extending that to do, then what does your solvency look like? What does it mean for you to have the part of the aff without that part in terms of solvency when they're sort of extending that, in every speech? I thought that the argument about granting the counter-interp proves that you shouldn't run picks was kind of clever. I do think, though, that that's probably new. I do think that here's a place where there was some 1AR stuff that you didn't extend in the 2. The 1AR did extend 3 or 4 arguments why picks are bad, which I don't think was particularly answered in the 2NR. And so I think if you combine those with that argument that you're making, look, there's a bunch of different strategies. They even say that it's important for us to look at the strategies. They've now granted our counter interpretation, which we said was a perfectly good strategy, and are relying on one that we've said was bad, and we're the last team that talked about it, and here are the 4 reasons, why we said it was bad. Just that one little bit extra there, I think, then kind of makes that not kind of seem like such a new argument, and kind of gives it a little bit more of an impact. But I mean, I even went back and started rereading the 2NC to figure out what all the picks were, which I'm not even really sure I should do that. And I went back to the end and I was like, well, is this one in? Is this one not in? I mean, that's the kind of where I think that you spend too much time on things that I think ultimately are not super relevant, or at least if they are, you're not explaining why. The amount of time that you spent on whether or not the university is totally good or bad, I'm not sure. Even if I think that you're right on that, I'm not sure what the implication of that is. What part of their after they lose because of that argument? What does that have to do with the rest of the debate? And so you're a good speaker, and I can understand everything that you say, but I just think that you need to make the arguments that you're making very, very specific to the claims that they're making. And for me, it's just, I think in the end, a little too vague. Oh, and the last thing is, I think that you need to, I do think that they've indicted the source of a lot of your evidence, saying that that we shouldn't use internment with the jackal argument.
Yeah, the university portion of the pick, problems that I had with it. Number one, I'm not really sure what the link to it is. I'm really not.
I don't know that there's any part, even the parts of the evidence they read from Hooft in the 2AC that they didn't get to. I'm not even sure had they read all of that. It's really a totalizing rejection of the university, and especially, you know, in the 2 hours, like, why do you think we're here? Why do you think we're trying to grapple with this in this space? Why would we be? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, so that's a problem. The second thing that I think about the university K is I don't know why you get to do the testing for it. And the reason I say that is the testing arguments on the T page, testing arguments on that page are all rooted in the model minority arguments about how performance is forced upon debaters. You have to have this really, you know, constitutional, patriotic, and so the model minority part that emerges out of that, that's discussed in both the 1AC and the 2AC, they're using that as a criticism on the framework page to say why there shouldn't be testing. The theoretical basis in the 1NC is about why your praxis is testing, and here's why that's good. The only real defense you have of the testing is this Williams evidence, which is real specific to we shouldn't be in a position where we just always if we're trying to be allies, we shouldn't just be hands off and say, well, you have greater oppression, so I just won't say anything. We should be able to criticize, but from the 1AC cross-ex, they've said that it should be about testing what is the most appropriate strategy for Asian Americans grappling with the notion of debate. So I don't really see how they're saying you don't get to say anything, but instead, the particular type of testing that you've gone for has nothing to do with this model minority argument. You just left that to the side.
Can you articulate to me the criteria that make it different? Because I'm just not understanding.
Oh, what's different about what you've done is it's the neutrality argument. It's the neutrality argument that emerges from the 1AC that you when you start from the premise of testing, you presume that everyone comes to the space as a neutral observer, a neutral participant, that there's nothing in their element of their background, I don't know that it gets as specific as like socio-political, economic, whatever, but it is definitely making an argument about our participation in rules, norms, etc. is not neutral. It's always a performance that is driven by external factors. In this case, they've documented many of those that are particular to trying to be Asian in this space. And so I don't think that there's a defense of like, no, the testing is equal for everyone, it's totally the same. We're not just, and at different points, they characterize both pages as when you do this testing, the ultimate goal, what's the end point? It's really just about, well, we've trained a bunch of people who happen to be white folks because that's what the neutral or objective standards really promote. So there was never any pushback about that element of the 1AC. And so when they talk about the in the 2AR on the case page, why you shouldn't just grant them the whole case, like, yeah, you shouldn't. One thing that's masterful about this 1AC is that it's criticizing both the notions of civic participation in the topic and in the notion of debate, and highlighting how those are performances that are forced upon everyone that comes into the space, and those performances are not neutral. Right? It's very particular for Jeff. And so I just don't really see any way that you try to establish that wouldn't be true. That's why I think the testing is there's sort of this meta criticism of testing that emerges earlier against framework and works against this university argument. And then the last thing about the university argument, I don't know what part of the 1AC this tests. Just as a conceptual thing, right? The way you lay this out in the 1NC is like, and we get to test the AF, but what part of the AF is it that was like, yeah, the university is just like rejected always? I don't know where that's a thing in the 1AC. You're right that in the 2AC they say a thing about the nature of the academy being like the military, but I've already talked about why I don't think that's the total. Yeah. But did you really establish in the 1NC that you get to pick out of things that aren't the 1AC performance? I don't know. This is not a thing that I voted on, but it's just like, I don't really know that that's the way the structure of the argument was in the 1NC. You get to roll with the punches of the AF, sure, but would that really, if the goal is to test the performance, test what they've said about in the 1AC, would picking out of the university stuff really do that? I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. As far as the affect and the performance arguments go, I do think that the entire structure of the 1AC demonstrates that these things are all inevitable and already forced upon, and so it's only a question of how we navigate those spaces. I never really understood how those could be useful pick arguments against the AF. I think those are just, you'd need a theory of why affect is not inevitable, not forced upon, and why we're not constantly always performing. This goes right back into the model minority stuff and neutrality stuff I was just talking about. It's like, if if the performance is forced upon you always and it's not neutral, then I don't really know how I can say, oh yeah, we'll pick out a performance. I don't know how that would be a thing.
Right. I was also left with more questions and answers coming out of the 2NR block, everything like that. It's like, how exactly does all these things function, the university K, what's the link, what's the impact to that? And just to kind of tease it out, so I took a little bit longer, was just all right, I'm going to grant you the link and see where this impact takes me. And I ultimately think that they're probably right, that there's an aspect of assimilation and naturalization that occurs as a result of these types of tests that you're trying to do, things like that. I think that's, as far as I understand, it's a major component and impact to the 1AC. So I think there's a massive solvency deficit, even if I grant you the link to these types of arguments. And so I just played around with that for just a minute. But even then, I'm I don't know how that tests the, the refining post-memory, which is the key setup for everything that you're talking about there. I thought that your mass incarceration versus internment evidence was shockingly good and comparative. And when you get to the top, you're not going for, I'm this is a problem. I think that implicitly checks or tests the post-memory stuff. I think that your one piece of evidence that you read is yes, internment is also known as incarceration. It even sets up kind of the link argument that they're making. I think that y'all need to do a little bit more to do that. I think that you're making inroads against this that not an auto vote, but I think that y'all are at least, I don't want to say ahead, but definitely in the game with that type of stuff. Yeah. At least with me. So I think that I think you're spot on with we're not policing language. In fact, we're saying that there is a better term that will allow for people to grapple with what is going on here. In fact, your evidence seems to speak to that, the ability to link up with other groups to be able to, incarceration is a better term because it links with other minority groups like the Muslim ban, things like that. So I think that that's your best offense. And I think this one that is the only one that ever made sense to me in the context of this affirmative to be able to say that we are actually testing, and actually is the only one that I can say has even a net benefit that I can identify. And once that's gone, I'm this is a problem. And I'm not sure why you kicked that portion of it. Was it the police and the language stuff? Were you kind of worried about going on into that type of stuff, or did you just think that the others were dropped?
I was following ink, and I totally get why that's a problem, and that it's people were unpersuaded by the link in the first place and not getting it in the first place, and yeah. Okay, so it was just you wanted to go for what was dropped and going for that? Yeah, it's there's no answer to this. Yeah, in this instance, I think going through that.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. I don't know what Sherry thinks. I thought the original link about internment versus mass incarceration was your best bet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat everything because I agree with the questions about affect going on with that. I'm not sure what I would be voting for at the end of the debate if I voted neg, while the AF is very clear as to what they stand for instead of these amorphous moving around things. I think once they set up in the 2NC kind of these weird condo rules that weren't in the 1NC, I think that you can just blast them, just clown them on this is brand new in the 2NC. This is exactly what we're criticizing when we're talking about how they're able to deploy forget everything else. It's just white people doing their things and playing around taking stuff. Just
setting up new rules and things.
Yeah, just they're always moving the goalposts. Right. We can't just defend one thing. As soon as something else pops up, they're gonna be well, now this is a new thing. That's I think a missed opportunity just to kind of make the even just brand new reject this entire idea type thing. Okay, fine. You get to say internment versus mass incarceration. Maybe some minor issues there about whether that's legitimate or not. Suddenly to be no, we get to narrow down. Okay, fine, everyone kicks things, whatever. But like we get to shift around and decide what we're going to criticize and do things. And suddenly we were just not even going to talk about what the original one was, and now it's just this like that. That's the part that I have a problem with this. I think that if you just like keep it simple with that, I think you're in pretty good shape for me. Obviously, there's other args that they're gonna be able to talk about, and 2AR would be dramatically different had you gone for that. They might have changed it, but there it is.
Can I ask you a question that kind of moves back to like where we very started with
Yeah.
Sherry's decision, which is just like, what do you want in terms of an explanation of what the pick is in the 2NR? Like what, it sounds like everybody kind of wants a paragraph of explanation of what the final pick is that I'm going for in the 2NR. What for you must be there, and for you specifically, this is the third time you judges doing this. The first time you gave functionally the same decision as you just gave. The middle time it worked. So like, what did I do, and what am I not doing now?
Do you want me to start?
Whoever.
Okay. Well, like, since you said me specifically,
no, I understand.
Yeah. I think just being able to explain what it is that you are doing, because like they like Sherry said, asking questions like, what does it look like when you say we're going to exclude the prioritization of affect? What are you instead prioritizing? I think is a question that you might want to at least like start to move into. Like exclude the university stuff. Like I just like explain like what does the, I'm going to call it the counterclaim, just like what does the counterclaim do at that point in time? Right? You're explaining what it excludes, but you're not explaining what it actually does. Does that make sense?
Okay. Maybe another way to think about this is, yes, we know that you're doing everything that's the AF except for the part you want to pick out of. Explain why that accesses certain parts of what the AF is claiming they solve that they think are solvency deficits. How does your affirmation of everything about the 1AC that's not the university pick, for instance, access this model minority argument and make it such that you are testing in a way that is not presuming neutrality, that is not attempting to force a particular mode of civic participation upon them? If there was explanation about that, then maybe we can get behind, oh yeah, sure, now I get how this is accessing, solving a variety of the AF commitments, but at the same time avoiding this totalizing university criticism.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah, I think the easiest example I can use is just what you had in the 1 and C.
Yeah.
Like it's very clear as to what you are trying to do with this. Like, internment versus mass incarceration. You're like, this is what we should do instead. Here's what we're excluding. Here's why this all affects what they're trying to do. And so like all the solving terms, you're like, I think even with that, you're making a claim that you can solve the app better than what they do.
And I guess I failed to write down that you said you weren't going for internment, which is why I was looking back like, what the hell are you even going for?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for me, it's really just a lot about clarity. And I know you've got 3 judges and not everybody thinks about conditionality the way I do. It wouldn't have taken very much either to just say, you can't just say, as the round goes on, we're going to add or subtract, we'll figure it out, And by the 2NR, we'll get it figured out. And if you dropped anything, you don't get to answer it because, it's just not really fair. And so I'm very, very, it's not like I'm going to punish him, but reject the argument in this case is essentially reject the team. So it doesn't take very long to extend just a little bit of that. And you can say, look, the cross-ex just demonstrated how you just really don't know what you're voting for, especially if they get to add in things and take things out.
So would you like more of kind of the, James makes like in the 1AR like a pretty standard like picks bad explanation about like infinitely regressive. Would you like have wanted that a little more like?
Well, infinite regression was I already said that was extended in the 1NR and 1AR and should have been.
That's why.
I don't even think it needed a whole lot more explanation because it was dropped in the 2NR. So definitely.
You just need that more cleanly extended, and that would have been. Because I don't think Jeff kind of says picks are bad, but I don't think like in the 2AR.
No, but I'm just saying the conditionality part of getting to add and subtract other things is distinct from whether or not because picks infinitely regressive just means you could always pick out of something smaller. This argument, it's sort of about an impact outside of the round, what it justifies in other debates, whereas the conditionality bad argument is about what's going on in this debate, and I'm always much more persuaded by things that are happening in this debate than what somebody justifies for another debate.
Yeah, I think that if y'all set up like we got to do all this stuff in the 1 and C, I didn't get all. If you did that in 1 and C, I missed it. If you set that up in the 1 NC, I'm a lot more amenable to the you had your opportunity to answer this in the 2 NC rather than starting that process in the 2 NC.
So you're saying that like the more extensive version of the 1 NC you've seen in the past was better, basically.
As far as like being able to answer the suddenly you get to do that, that's why I'm like in the 1 AR I thought that they would have been completely justified. Be like, are you kidding me? Defense as for that. But if you set it up in the 1 NC, they've got the opportunity in the 2 AC to answer all this type of stuff. And they don't.
Yeah.
I'm just going to shrug my shoulders. And
Yeah, the other answer to your question, Ezra, about how to simplify it is just at the very beginning say, all right, we are going for the performance pick, right? Or we're going for the university pick. We're going to go for the affect pick, but we're going to say, judge kick or whatever. We're not going for internment. We're not going for this. It's like one extra sentence that you have to add, but
it's like necessary.
It's in one spot, and because there's the multiple moving parts, which you've justified earlier in the debate, you do want to make it clear for your critics which ones.
Yeah.
One last question that's kind of like a different thread from everything. People have suggested that if I'm going to go for frame subtraction, I should have gone for the 1 NC link. Do you think that the better 2 R was frame subtraction with the 1 NC link or T?
I think that I thought that there was too much not answered in the 1 NR on T for you to win T.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say because I don't know where that was going to go.
Right.
But my perception of that after the block was that you probably were not going to be able to win T.
The one countervailing thought for that, I totally agree, but the one countervailing thought is the way that the 2AR was able to cross-apply a bunch of stuff about the nature of testing. You might have been in a spot where you kind of had to talk about both pages realistically either way. I think that's just the way that the two arguments both involve this sort of testing, the way their offense goes against it.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely thought that the 1 NC internment versus mass incarceration was your best option.
Right.
I think there are implicit answers of like testing. Like
Well, it's the thing that you have, you have the most evidence on. But I mean, you do then have to, I think, have a better answer to their argument that the people who write those cards are racist, or are speaking from, maybe they're not personally, but that comes from a particular social place that we should approach with skepticism.
Yep. All right. Thank you all.
Yeah, I think you all could be a little bit more clear about the JPEG disad stuff, or Jackal. Sorry, Jackal disad.
I have absolutely no idea what you're
I think
referring
you could be more clear about like what the link to that is. Is it because the arguments they're making emerge from this literature? Is it because it's people affiliated with it? Is it because it's the nature of something in the 1EC that accesses that? You all were using a lot of shorthand to it that by the end I didn't really get what you were
A
talking
lot of
about.
what that is explaining is what Jackal is. Is that kind of?
I just try to control F to find like evidence of just.
I can do that part.
but
It's more what is the connection?
Yeah, because I guess what I'm
That's
saying is
the
the
part.
1AC has a lot to do with Jackal
Yes.
and like Jackal's
Yeah.
relationship to forming identity.
Right.
So
and
we need to be
where's
explaining
where's
that
that connection? It is cross-applied as a disad on the pin, but
Yeah.
how? Why?
How does it
For what?
relate? Yeah.
After the 2AC, it's kind of just
Yeah.
it's just simply referencing.
So really, I think like a lot of the best, maybe like clear application of this is explaining Jackal particularly to like the testing argument, because a lot of it's very related to kind of the model minority argument about whether or not you're a good agent. So applying it like there, it like specifically is what the 2AR should have.
Yeah, I understood what the argument was. I just had no. I was like, I'm just gonna try to find what evidence this is referencing, or things like that. So I was like, Jackal. I don't even know what that specifically means. Do I spell it like the animal or the JCKEL or what? Like, because I try to control F and I'm not finding it here. The explanation of the impact made perfect sense to me. Just like, they're coming from that position. Just like, so this first time I've heard this out for these arguments. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
But now I understand. So, or hopefully.
And by the way, there was something I meant to say the other night that I had written down, but I was trying not to just read my speech and kind of look up for the paper a little, and I did forget to say that part of the reason that we were doing it this year was because you guys had gotten the first round at large for the first Messenger school, and I wanted to specifically acknowledge that and congratulate him in front of everyone, and I forgot, so sorry about that.
Thank you.